All are present. We do have a quorum, so now we will begin. Robin?
Good afternoon. First up today, we're going to have two of the outside agencies that were not able to present last week, and then we'll move on to wastewater and infrastructure, and then we'll finish up with Department of Emergency Services, who was also not able to present last week. And so we will start off with United Community Services. Jack Habig will give a quick overview, and then we'll turn it over to Julie Brewer.
Good afternoon. The county contribution for community planning for United Community Services remains at $100,000 as it was last year. The county contribution for the Human Service Fund for United Community Services remains at $151,500 as the same as it was last year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Julie Brewer, the Executive Director.
And I'll actually have Tom Herzog, our Vice President of the UCS Board, speak first. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Good afternoon. I'm Tom Herzog. My family and I are resident of Johnson County for the last 20 years. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at NetSmart, which is headquartered here in Johnson County. And I'm here today in my role as Vice President of the Board of United Community Services of Johnson County, along with my colleague, Becky Yoakum, our President. I want to begin by first thanking the Board of Commissioners, Chairman Eidert, and the county staff for your leadership, collaboration, and partnership with UCS as we address issues and opportunities for the well-being of our residents. This past year, the county has been instrumental in addressing the needs for our community, specifically prioritizing housing and the impact of homelessness through your work on the Housing Subcommittee. UCS has been proud to support the county in this work. We appreciate the Commissioner's priority of strengthening and financing the appropriate level of service to meet the needs of the county's most vulnerable populations while creating conditions that promote community health. UCS is proud to support and partner with the county in this shared priority. I want to ask Julie Brewer, our Executive Director, who I know is our fearless leader, passionate to serve cause and community, and advocate for every resident to present our plan, results, and vision for a healthy and thriving community. Thank you for having us here today.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Becky, for both of your board leadership with United Community Services of Johnson County. If I could just, and I don't know if I have the ability to go backwards on our slide, or if that's, oh. Okay, awesome. So wanted to start out and just share with you, as you will be familiar at the beginning of the year when our budget information is due and we submit any requests for additional resources. We did submit a request for additional resources of $25,000. That would bring up our request for 2023 from $100,000, which is what the current grant level has been, to $125,000. And I'll certainly be happy to stand for questions regarding that request for increase. I'll go ahead and move forward. Once again, as many of you are familiar with, we really have tried to help visually create a vision of the work that UCS does. Our mission, of course, is to provide data analysis, lead collaborative planning, and mobilize resources to enhance the availability and delivery of health and human services. That's a lot. That's a very lofty goal and mission for the organization. So really what we've done over the years is really boil that down. What does that look like? That looks like our core work is around that education and advocacy. That's that research and data analysis that we do that informs not only our decision-making, but also much of our community relies on that data analysis. Mobilizing and planning, that's really creating that space, right, that people can come together to look at an issue, to collaborate, and to create informed plans and implementation processes. And then targeted resource allocation. We've served as a contractor for many years for many of our jurisdictions, including Johnson County, with the Human Services Fund and the Alcohol Tax Fund. And of course, part of our responsibility is the lead agency for the Continuum of Care on Homelessness in Johnson County, KS 505. is inclusive of a joint funding process that we do and submit to HUD every year. Moving on to our next slide. So another way to look at our work is really through that lens of the social determinants of health. On the left-hand side is that core work that I discussed. And it's really that core work which allows us to lift up subject-specific work year to year that's responsive to identified issues and needs. Those are issues and needs that have been identified through our jurisdictional partners, such as the county, through community agencies, and through the community outreach that we do on a regular basis throughout Johnson County. Just some of the highlights in 2021 and 22, if we go on to the next slide. The county and many of you of our commissioners have been instrumental in the multi-year work that we've done around addressing safe, stable, attainable housing in our community. Early 21, that culminated in the release of the Johnson County Municipalities Housing Study. We went directly into the Housing Task Force work, bringing together more than 100 of our community members. Of course, we were virtual at that time, so that was advantageous because we had no limits to the folks who could join us around the table. And that multi-month process resulted in the Housing Toolkit. We continue that work not only through our presentations to our jurisdictions and coming alongside their work, certainly supporting the Board of County Commissioners Housing Subcommittee that was stood up in April of 21 and culminated in your recent recommendations report. But we've also been working and addressing education around other key decision makers when we talk about housing in our community, and that is our planning commissions. So bringing them together really in a collaborative bi-state way for ongoing learning opportunities. We hosted one with Mark in October, another one in May, and actually Mark has worked to turn some of those learning into ongoing webinars that it can be on demand as new commissioners come on. In 2021, we also took the Johnson County Health Equity Network, that is the leadership team, that multi-sector leadership team that has led the housing work over the last 4 years through a strategic planning process. We continue in our housing focus around lifting up a couple of the recommendations that came out of the housing study and toolkit, one of which is the learning circles. And then we additionally have identified another area of health equity focus and are partnering with the Johnson County Department of Health and Environment to focus on utilization of their new community health workers to address identified health equity needs in our community. And then, once again, just to remind us, one of the great things about working in collaborations in the private and public sector is the ability of UCS to leverage resources effectively, bringing together foundational grant resources from the Kansas Health Foundation, the Reach Healthcare Foundation, the Health Forward Foundation, and Evergy, alongside with city and county investment to really lift up the work that's been done over the last 4 years. Another highlight for 2021 that has continued on into 2022 is our Transitional Age Youth Planning Project. We began this is actually our 4th year that we are wrapping up this month. And just some of the current highlights, we're in the 3rd year of our Bridge to Success pilot with Johnson County Community College and Olathe Public Schools, recognizing and utilizing the mentor program in Olathe Public Schools and connecting with the success advocates in the Johnson County Community College to really bridge students, especially students who are facing a number of barriers as they cross the stage to become a high school graduate to access training and educational programs in post-secondary education. And then this year, we also launched a pilot with the Department of Children and Family Services Independent Living Program and Johnson County Transit to address some of the transportation barriers of youth aging out of foster care as they work to complete education, secure jobs, and maintain a network of health and supportive services. A couple more highlights on the next slide certainly is our year-round work with the Continuum of Care on homelessness. We've been the lead agency for over 20 years, and the details are highlighted there. Our most recent NOFO, that is the federal grant to the Department to HUD, garnered over $880,000 to agencies that qualified within the Johnson County area to address those needs of individuals in our community experiencing or at risk to experience homelessness. We have been responsive, as we have for over going on 60 years now, to needs of our jurisdictions. In the last year, we had a number of jurisdictions that prioritized diversity and equity issues, and we came alongside and looked to partner them in addressing their priorities. We continue our contract work administering, actually we support the Drug and Alcoholism Council in their duty to review and recommend grant expenditures for the Alcohol Tax Fund and also convene and facilitate the Human Service Fund process. Additionally, we serve on many boards within the county and the community to help support the work, priority work throughout our community. As we know, we're still in that recovery process from COVID-19, and so our highlights do include still work in that area. Through the Continuum of Care on Homelessness and the Johnson County Housing Authority, HUD last year stood up a new opportunity called Emergency Housing Vouchers, expressly for those who were experiencing homelessness. That particular voucher opportunity did require an MOU between a community's housing authority and their Continuum of Care on Homelessness. We were happy to partner and have been partnering with the Johnson County Housing Authority to take in the 62 vouchers, go through the process of obligating them and working to secure housing. We also have been working with the county and community collaboration of agencies and the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation to have efficient and effective utilization of KIRA, the Kansas Emergency Rental Assistance Fund, and newer, as it launched in late April, the Kansas Homeowners Assistance Fund. And we've have done ongoing work to address different, I would say, procedural and technical hiccups in making sure the utilization of that is effective and efficient, especially for our residents here in Johnson County who would qualify. We are completing our efforts with a community response committee through an MOU we've had with the Johnson County Department of Health and Environment to address testing and vaccination opportunities and barriers for highly impacted populations in the county. And I'm thrilled to see that that work has moved forward with this effort into a new grant that is broadening to looking at health equity issues on a more broader scale within our community. And then we're starting up our collaboration after a series of meetings and a lot of educational webinars through HUD for both the COC and for the Housing Authority on the process we need to go through as a community to utilize the almost $4 million of home ARP dollars that Johnson County qualifies for. Just as a reminder, unlike other federal response dollars that come down to a community, these are dollars that have been identified for the amount, but a needs assessment and a plan has to be submitted and approved by HUD, and that requires a collaboration between the Housing Authority and the Continuum of Care on Homelessness. Believe it or not, we're in year 3.5, I think, or 3. UCS continues to serve on the Kansas City Regional Rapid Response and Recovery Fund Advisory Committee. I can't say enough of the private philanthropic dollars in the bi-state area that have maintained their commitment to continuing to address issues for organizations and individuals impacted, especially in the recovery phase due to the pandemic. All this work culminates in alignment with the priority of the Board of County Commissioners 2021-2022 Strategic Priority Plan, Priority 3, around strengthening and finance the appropriate level of service to meet the needs of the county's vulnerable population and create conditions that promote community health. We're also proud that we also align with priorities residents identified as critical in the 2022 Johnson County Community Survey. And UCS continues to support the work and aligns with the Board of County Commissioners Housing Subcommittees recently released recommendations report to address homelessness, preserve existing housing, and develop attainable housing and home ownership opportunities. As shared earlier, this demonstrates the history of our planning grant over the last 4 years, and then also our Human Service Fund. With the Human Service Fund, we do try to not increase that request of that fund year to year. When we do an increase, we talk to the county and our other jurisdictions that participate, and we lay out a path for a 2-year funding level. That's why that funding level does not change for 2023. We're thrilled. One of the things that we were able to discuss in 21 for 22 and 23 was the creation of a small grants pool in the Human Service Fund for organizations, small organizations asking for grants below $5,000, for whom completing and being a part of the full-scale grant process can be a barrier for where they are. They do important work in the organization, in the community, but may not have the infrastructure to be as responsive to a typical higher barrier grant process. It allows us, and our Director of Resource Allocation has been meeting out and doing the site visits at the new small grants pool agencies to help them in their own development. We share our 2021 financial review. Our audit has been completed, and we just approved the audit report at our last board meeting, so the audit should be published in the next few weeks, and this is reflective of that information. And then finally, when we talk about how do we measure the work that we do, many of our large events have in place post-survey opportunities for participants. That helps us in evaluating and planning future gatherings. When we took our HEN, our Health Equity Network, through its strategic planning, that's that multi-sector leadership team that has worked together over the last 4 years. We started with an intensive evaluation of the work, what has worked well, what could be improved, and how do we move forward. We just released at the beginning of this year the Alcohol Tax Fund Funding Priorities Report. As those of you who have been a part of on the Board of County Commissioners for a number of years are aware, about every 3 to 5 years we go through a priority funding process to ensure that the dollars are aligning with the priority needs within the community. And then our annual census data, our homeless point-in-time count, our systems performance measures, and our grant reports and outcomes are all ongoing components of evaluation that we complete for those projects to which we are engaged. And then we just conducted this year a UCS board planning retreat to identify progress on past priorities and look at future trends. And with that, I will stand for question.
Okay, Ms. Brewer, I should note for the record that I am a member of the advisory board for UCS. That is different than the board of directors of UCS. And your request is to increase the budget from 100,000 to 125 on the county's part, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Ms. O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for acknowledging your connection with UCS. And I believe there were some other commissioners, at least maybe last year, were on an advisory committee or some sort of committee connected with UCS. And I believe that perhaps there is some people that have contributed. I just think that for full disclosure, we need to understand.
Well, that's fine. We've had that conversation previously. I think there are several members of this board as well as members of the community who contribute financial support to UCS. Yes.
Okay, and also, you were collaborative with KU and what's PMC? Who is that?
Public Management Center, so University of Kansas Public Management Center.
Okay, thank you. And KLC,
Kansas Leadership Center,
Kansas Leadership Center, that's right, and then CSCP.
Critical Social Change Project.
Okay. And this, one of the statements that I read in one session was that the white racial frame is the foundation of systemic racism. And that is really concerning to me, and I think that everyone knows that my youngest daughter is adopted and that she is biracial. She's of African and Korean descent, and I found your curriculum extremely troubling, and I hesitate to give any public money to organizations that promote this type of racial discordance. It's just, it's unbelievable for me to read some of this stuff. And I actually attempted to listen in to one of your meetings after they went back to Zoom, and I was told that there was no room for me. So I just have a lot of problems. Number one, that we have all these connections on the board and with staff with this organization, and then we and including our county manager, and then we have recommendations to give you $100,000 and then asking for $25,000 more. And I just find it extremely troubling to have an agenda-driven organization getting public money. That's just my
Okay, thank
thought.
you. Ms. Brewer, could you respond to the first question?
Absolutely. There's a number of questions that I'll unpack. One is a clarification. United Community Service has what's called a Council of Advisors. That's a non-voting group. It has no fiduciary responsibility to the organization. It has no voting powers associated with the organization. It is simply what it is called, an advisory council. It has existed for decades. Who populates the advisory council is populated by certain key positions within the community, including the Board of County Commissioners, chair, the county manager, other state, former or current state elected officials, the head of the community college, the head of the Edwards, KU Edwards campus, other community sector leaders within the community. Much of our work, really the bulk of our work, is focused on being responsive to the needs of the community as it is nestled in health and human services. Our organization goes back almost 60 years now. As a matter of fact, recreation used to be in the name of United Community Services before we became United Community Services. Why? Because when the community was growing quickly in the late 60s, around 1967, the community determined to form a we take our history from the planning council histories to form a group that is intentional on community planning around key elements that impact the well-being of our community. In order to assure that we are aligning and are reflective of what the needs of the community are, we formed an advisory council. Why? To simply be able to reflect and give advice to the organization to assure that we are staying in alignment with what community needs are. There are oftentimes that group, it only meets formally once a year, that simply reflects on, are we staying current with community priorities and needs? That is separate than the board of directors, which do have the fiduciary responsibility and oversight of the organization. The other reality with the board of directors is we have had somebody from the county serve on the board of directors year after year. If we think about it from a very transparent orientation, it's that opportunity to ensure that planning grant dollars that are utilized by the organization are being handled in the way to which they are attended and have that ongoing connection, especially said oftentimes that the county has called on the UCS to use our planning expertise at the behest of addressing some of the priorities identified within the county's planning itself.
All right, thank you.
Does that help?
Thank you. Mr. Ashcraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions, and Scott, I'll direct this to you. the $25,000 request doesn't appear in the documents. And I wasn't tracking with you. Was there a timing issue?
I apologize, we should have said this at the beginning. With the outside agencies, we include them in the county-wide tab. And so, under county-wide, under support services, that's where that $25,000 request is.
It wasn't included in the bar chart at the beginning of the presentation.
That's because it's not included in the proposed budget.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Brewer, I was looking for UCS's mission statement. Was it in the presentation?
It is. It was slide number 2, and the mission is to provide data analysis, lead collaborative planning, and mobilize resources to enhance the availability and delivery of health and human services.
So, what are the metrics? It's interesting, I don't have that slide 2. That's why I didn't find it, I apologize. None of us seem to have slide 2, so that's not your fault. Slide 5 now, okay.
I'm sorry, I can only go by
Oh, there it
the
is.
number
Very
of my
good.
handout.
Anyway, the point is, so what are the metrics that will be impacted by this $25,000, and what are you hoping to achieve with that? And by extension, why 25? Why not 50 or why not 5? How did that number come forward, and what are you anticipating or what are you projecting will be the impact of that on your mission?
Absolutely. Certainly with the addition of, when you think about our organization, our work, we are not a direct service agency, so our core work is around the research and the data analysis and the convening and planning and the resource allocation. And so as requests on collaboration have increased over the last few years, just some, key areas, including the additional work we'll be taking on with the home ARP process that is mandated by HUD to have us go through in order to submit a plan as a county to qualify for those dollars, in addition to additional work as the Board of County Commissioners identifies its priorities through the Housing Subcommittee. Growing work that we have seen arise in the last few years with a number of community groups that have come together around priority issues. An example is the Good Faith Network and what work they want to be engaged in, and also bringing them along in that journey and alignment around those priority issues that our faith community would like to be more engaged in. And then certainly the work that we're doing with the Johnson County Department of Health and Environment, especially as it's able to move back more to its Health 3.0 and in alignment with its CHA and its CHIP work.
In the context of your mission statement, Ms. Brewer, one of the issues that has been raised from time to time over the years is that, and this will probably sound harsher than I intend, but that the service delivery elements in the community are somewhat fractured, disassociated. They sometimes have overlapping or competing, or maybe in some cases there are holes in the safety net. And I was always impressed by and under the impression that UCS was one of the only agencies in Johnson County that was attempting to strengthen that disparity in service elements. Is my perception incorrect?
No, I would say that is where we, if you think about what our core expertise is and how we utilize that on behalf of the well-being of the community, certainly it's that convening and planning that is also informed by that research and data analysis. I think great examples is our continuum of care on homelessness. I think when I appeared last year, I shared with you that we were nationally recognized for the work of the COC through that national measurement. It's part of when we talk about the systems performance, the SPM, that systems performance measurement. Then additionally, our Transitional Age Youth Planning Project. I mean, it's through that collaboration of connecting K-12 with secondary ed and looking for filling those gaps of what's happening to students that have higher barriers that aren't transitioning to opportunities for training and additional education. So those, I think, are great examples. Quite frankly, what we're doing with KIRA and with CAF, and making sure that we're maximizing the utilization of those emergency rental assistance and Kansas homeowner assistance funds, and really addressing what are technical hiccups in the process, I think has been very valuable to not only our residents, but our community partners.
Okay. Last question then, Mr. Chairman. So Ms. Brewer, you've been executive director now for 7-8 years?
Since 2016, so 6 years.
6 years?
Yeah.
It just seems like longer. And
Well, thank you.
I mean that respectfully. No, I mean that respectfully. You've had quite
My
an
family
impact.
says that too sometimes.
The question is, so over the last 7 years, how do we assess the level of success in terms of providing those umbrella services or safety net services, both in terms of effectiveness and efficiency? Well, how do we measure that success?
Well, certainly, I think the ready availability of key services and identifying where there needs to be better coordination and collaboration of key services is vital. I know you and I meet yearly to discuss some of those metrics, and I know what we always discuss is oftentimes people think those who are experiencing barriers such as homelessness or barriers such as touching the safety net system go through that process as a class, and that's not just how it happens. It's people who will touch and relaunch and touch and relaunch. So it's really an understanding of how do you create that infrastructure that allows people to relaunch as soon as possible. I think a great indicator is we know that when someone experiences homelessness for more than a month, that rehousing becomes a very strong uphill battle. That if you can rehouse someone within a week of them experiencing homelessness, those outcomes are going to be better. So it's really just understanding how you can weave a fabric that allows that to be as efficient as possible.
Thank you.
Ms. Allenbrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, full disclosure, at one point in time, I was on the board, and I was pretty proud of being on UCS board, but that's been some time ago, so that's always going to probably show my age. But a couple of questions. What's the PPP loan?
Thank you for asking that question. So in 2020, we had a number of things happen. One of the things that happened, in addition to the stay in place, and that impacted, right, workplace and workflow, we had a number of our multi-year project grants get an extension of 6 months, which is awesome, but it was no additional dollars. It was saying this work was due to be completed by X. We will extend it by 6 months, understanding with the pandemic it will take longer to accomplish the work. So when you look at your resource, you have to look at, I'm not going to have new funds coming in. How am I going to maintain? One, am I going to be able to keep all staff fully employed? Two, is there work to be done? And three, how am I going to accomplish that as I have a variance in my resources? So we did receive a $76,500 PPP loan over an 8-week period. We treated it like a grant. What do I mean? We assigned all appropriate costs to that PPP loan. We did not assign any of those costs to any of those grants. That allowed those grant dollars that were extended by 6 months but not increased to be able to be utilized and spent down and keep the organization stable. And the grant was fully forgiven.
Couple more things. Well, I really appreciate that you work very diligently with your board on also receiving grants and also private donations. One of the programs that I was wondering if you could elaborate on, that pilot program that you have with Olathe Public Schools and Johnson County Community College. I think that, from my understanding, that's been a success.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, in the first year of the pilot, prior to the pandemic, one of the success stories that was shared, I believe, at a Johnson County Board of Regents meeting was not only did one of the high school participants graduate from high school, go on and enroll as a student with Johnson County Community College. But her mother was who participated because we included legal guardians, parents, and mentors in the sessions that we had with the students, was so inspired that she re-enrolled to complete her GED. Through Johnson County Community College. That program began with just seniors this year. It's been scaled up for juniors and seniors. We're looking to do a 2-year cohort process to really come alongside a student who may be a first-generation student who may desire to go on to college or go on to a different type of training program, and really equip them with, what do I need to be thinking about? What do I need to prepare for? It culminates with a tour of the college and assistance in registering for programs. One of the exciting things about this, if we think about it, is with the participation of your mentor. So the mentor program with Olathe Public Schools ended with the student once they crossed the stage to graduation. But for many students, crossing the stage to graduation is crossing the stage into finding my own living situation, covering all my own expenses, and really being responsible for all next steps. And so the mentor program has now extended, so those mentors stay with the youth after they graduate into at least their first semester at college. If you think about it, oftentimes we're not in crisis at noon while we're on campus or at our workplace or wherever we can get the support, but it might be 8 o'clock on a Sunday night, and you're trying to decide, am I going to make it to school the next day? So we really wanted to extend that mentor program, and we are thrilled that the Olathe Public Schools also had that as a vision. And then Johnson County Community College had set up success advocates, but they weren't having a lot of contact with some of the students that they were really created to support. And we really, working with the school district and the community college, identified that oftentimes you need to build the relationship before the need is there. So the Bridge to Success program allows the success advocates to be meeting with the students while they're still in high school, before they would ever become a student on campus, and build the trust and the relationship that can transfer into when the student is on campus.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. Ms. Hansley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Brewer and Mr. Herzog, for being here today. I have an observation and then 2 questions. First of all, I was sitting here thinking how long I have worked with UCS in the community, and it's been, I think, 26 years. When I first started at Safe Home as the grant writer, that's when I became familiar with UCS, and through the years, I have continued to be impressed and grateful for the leadership of UCS in bringing together, as Commissioner Ashcraft mentioned, bringing together all of our human service agencies to prioritize and work together to meet the needs that UCS so ably measures and provides data. I know for myself, I don't know how I could have written grants without the data from UCS in regard to the needs in our community. There's no other organization in the county that provides that kind of information. The other thing that I'm always impressed with UCS is UCS always says yes when there are needs or opportunities. For example, I'm looking at page 9. You've stepped up to help with the emergency housing vouchers, the KIRA, the CAF, the vaccination opportunities, the home ARP funds, and then the regional response and recovery funds. It's really hard to briefly describe the value that UCS provides to Johnson County. I know in my past work with Safe Home, when I would attend statewide or even nationwide conferences or meetings, and I would talk about, oh, we have an organization that provides that data, or we have a group that is helping all of our human service agencies move forward. people would be so envious and surprised that we had this kind of organization because very, very few other communities do. I'm thinking especially about UCS's leadership on the trauma-informed care. Johnson County is a leader in the country on trauma-informed care implementation. It was UCS that helped get that big SAMHSA grant that allowed our law enforcement, corrections,
Agency staff and school
agencies-
districts to all be
Yeah, school
trained
district.
to be trauma-informed.
to be trained. That was huge, and we did it all without getting really any recognition for that. But it was amazing, and so my two questions are: one, how many staff do you have at UCS?
We have a total of 5 full-time staff, and we have 2 part-time staff and a newly minted intern.
Okay, and if I'm correct, that hasn't changed a whole lot in 26 years.
We were able to do the part-time staff, the first part-time staff person, thanks to a Health Foundation's core operating grant. That's a renewable grant that allowed us to expand into adding capacity. As you can imagine, we have highly educated, highly trained professionals. When you think about the work that you have to do with research, data analysis, it's an art, convening and facilitating, and also reviewing and digging into recommendations for funding that we take and doing the evaluation work. So having some added capacity has been invaluable.
So you've done a lot with really a bare bones staff. And then my second question is, as I look at page 9, have you received any additional funding at all to provide the responses that are listed there on that page?
So your page 9 is, he has helped me, my page 9 is going to be different.
There it is. There it is.
So certainly, we're very thankful. Last year, we did receive a multi-year grant from restricted grants specifically to have that second additional part-time person, specifically around our required work with the MOU for the emergency housing vouchers, and then also the capacity to deal with the Kansas Emergency Rental Assistance and the Kansas Housing Homeowners Assistance Fund. And that grant is strictly just covering that person. There's no administrative overhead, none of that. It's straight pay for the individual that was engaged through 2023. And why through 2023? Because that's when those funds start to expire. And so we need to continue.
But you're still, you provide a lot of services for which you receive no compensation, no reimbursement.
Correct.
And as I said, in my experience, UCS always says, yes, we'll do it. We'll figure out a way to take this on. And so that's why I'm very favorably looking at this request for $25,000 increase. It seems for all that you do for Johnson County, and especially all that you've done over the past couple of years with the COVID response, I'm very, very grateful, so thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Are there other questions? All right, well, I do have one question for staff. Did the additional $25,000, was that included in your recommendation?
No, it was not, with the
So
outside
that would have to be
agencies.
a revisit item. I
Correct.
just
We
wanted to
see it
make
as
that
a
point, yes.
Board policy decision.
Okay, thank you very much. Julie, Tom, thank you.
Okay, up next is the Enterprise Center, and before we begin, before Jack comes up, I wanted to say that it is under support services. There is a economic development programs, page 25, and yes, and the RER is actually on 27. They do have a request for some one-time and then ongoing funding. Okay, Jack, go ahead.
The total county contribution to Enterprise Center in Johnson County remains at $682,175 as it was last year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff Shackelford, the President and CEO.
Thank you for the time. Nice to see all of you again. You mentioned the mission statement for the organization before. Ours is here, but I'm going to boil it down. For the 26 years the Enterprise Center has been in existence, it's really one mission. It's job creation. And we do that through working with early-stage entrepreneurs who haven't launched a business, and we help them launch that, to existing businesses throughout the county and the region that want to grow from $100,000 to $1 million or $5 million to $10 million, as well as those entities that have scalable ideas that could become the next Garmin, the next Cerner, the next DST, but don't know how to get the early-stage funding to make that happen. So we're basically an economic engine for the county and the region, and if you will, the state. The state of Kansas continues to trail the national average on entrepreneurship, the national average on jobs created by entrepreneurs, and unfortunately sees more businesses fail in the first year than the national average as well. So we try to cover all those bases. Before I forget, I brought with me Sherry Turner, who runs the Women's Business Center and many of the Enterprise Center programs, and Christina Hammonds, who is our controller. So they will help me answer the difficult questions that I'm sure you'll throw at me later. So if you will, we touch a lot of different areas, from education to mentoring to connections to capital, to supporting those traditionally underserved populations from an entrepreneurial standpoint, which is extremely important in today's environment. To continue to grow a diverse, sustainable economy, we have to get more early-stage entrepreneurs involved in the game. Traditionally, that's been dominated by white males and continues to be dominated, but we're seeing many more women entrepreneurs, many more entrepreneurs from people of color, as well as female entrepreneurs in traditionally male-dominated spaces. It's essential that, as I tell everybody, everybody needs to start a business because that's how we're going to sustain and grow the economy and create new jobs. Most research will tell you that almost all net new job growth in this country over the last 30 years has come from enterprises less than 3 years old. So while we appreciate the sprint cycles of hiring and unhiring, as well as the Cerners and so on, it's the new enterprises that really drive and sustain an economy. So I'm going to run through quickly just to give you an overview of some of the things we do. You can see on your slide, we are home to the only women's business center in the state of Kansas. Sherry and her team have run that, correct me here, for 22 years and continues. So they work directly one-on-one coaching, much education with the COVID and the inability to meet in person. They quickly migrated all of their things into an online platform. So we're now seeing women entrepreneurs and women business owners from literally across the country and several from outside the United States access that kind of education. And one of the reasons we've made a one-time request is we need to take that education and extend it beyond the women-owned business to the entire population, and it requires some resources to do that. We run a mentoring program. The speaker before me they were mentoring young people. We mentor young business owners. We have about 65 mentors who are successful business executives, owners in their own right who want to give back. Typically, we have about 30 companies in that program. They stay in it about 14 months, and the goal is to get you from wherever you are today, whether that's $100,000 in revenue or $10 million in revenue, and we do have that spectrum. How do you get to the next level? Because if you get to the next level, you create new jobs. And so we work with them. It's an MIT licensed program that's been very successful. We are access to capital, and that's capital in a number of ways. Microloans, so you want to start the daycare out of your house, or you want to start the corner bakery, but you don't know where to find the $10,000 to $15,000 to get that started. Sherry and her team are phenomenal in the microloan business, all the way up to you're an early stage, high growth potential business that needs to raise $1 million. And we run a large angel investment network that can help you gain access to that type of capital to grow. And I'll show you an example here in a couple of slides of what that ends up being in a positive manner. So. Am I directing the slides? Okay, great. So I threw this slide together just to give you an idea. We work across the county. So in each of your districts, we've touched a number of businesses in a number of ways. In 2021, late 2021, you asked us to do a business stabilization project. So we gave out 1,352 $10,000 grants to small businesses throughout the county. So the numbers in parentheses would represent where those grants went to by, I did it by city. It got a little crowded on the map there. The others are actually businesses that we're working with in a one-on-one basis, whether that's through mentoring, whether that's through helping them get access to capital. So, for example, Outdoor Equipment Solutions came to us when he was working out of his house, saw the need for small engine repair in the Merriam area. So through our mentoring and coaching, he's now got his storefront in Merriam and continues to grow rapidly, all the way to a young African-American female who grew up in the logistics business and wanted to start one of her own. So we helped her start Maze Freight Solutions, which is located in Overland Park, to all the way to AAA Rental, which is a 50-year-old company, but was recently purchased by a young lady at probably the worst possible time because she bought it right prior to COVID, and nobody wants to rent tents and get together. So we helped her survive that and now grow back to pre-COVID revenue levels. Sherry's group worked directly with a young lady that we helped launch a business called Srcfp. Believe it or not, it is shark repellent bracelets. And she launched that again at about the time the travel industry stopped. So we helped her find her PPP and EIDL loans. We helped her push those microloan payments out for 6 months. She's now back to pre-COVID revenue and looking to actually increase her manufacturing capacity in the area. The last one I want to touch on, in 2016, Mid-America Angels made our first investment in a company called RDO Medical. If we fast forward today, they just signed the agreement with the city of Olathe to build their manufacturing facilities in Olathe, which will employ 300 folks at a range of $60,000 to $80,000 a year. That's why it's extremely important we continue to find access to capital, because if you're launching a medical device entity that has to get FDA approval, it will take 5 to 7 years and quite a bit of money. So just some examples of how we work across the region. Our impact over the last, this is just limited to the last 10 years. We track kind of direct and indirect. You'll see number of jobs created, return on investments actually it's more capital raised after we help them get started. And we continue to do that. We run one of the largest angel networks in the Midwest and try to help them find access to that type of capital. The other thing that we work really hard to do is to leverage the 682 that was mentioned. You give us 532 in sort of an operating budget, and you give us $150,000 in matching funds, meaning we have to go match those with outside entities. So you can see we have leveraged those since 2015. I only went back that far to almost $4 for every dollar in that 150 matching fund, which also relates to why we have requested a one-time increase of $100,000 because of some opportunities we have to leverage that. So every dollar sort of directed to the Enterprise Center, we then leverage with federal, state, local organizations like Kauffman Foundation and others to gain more income for the Enterprise Center because we need more resources. We have a staff of 8 with a contractor. It's been that way for a number of years. There are many more things that we have seen that need to be done. We learned through the grant process that many of our small business owners lack financial literacy, and we would like to fill the gap. We have the program to do it. We just need the resources to push that out and handle the volume of folks that will want to enroll and go through that. We would like to take our mentoring program. It only mentors businesses who have been in business at least a year and some revenue requirements. We'd like to take that down to mentor early stage entrepreneurs. So you just launched your business. It's critical at that time that there are some people that can help you stay on track, stay focused to hit the next milestone, and hopefully improve that rate at which they live. So the one-time funding will allow us to do a number of things. We'll take all of the educational programs that the Women's Business Center has developed. They were pushed online. We'll extend those beyond to all entrepreneurs, all business owners. We'll extend that mentoring program. We'd like to work on more avenues for folks to access capital and build banking relationships. We've got a number of small businesses that didn't have a banking relationship. And when the PPP and the EIDL and things hit, it was devastating that they could not find anyone to work with those. So we see the real need to get them to be bankable and have a standard banking relationship if they're going to grow that business. So with that, I'm not going to ramble on any further. We will continue to push the state. We have some ideas for them with respect to helping turn that a national average, get us above the national average of entrepreneurship. It's been declining for a number of years. So there's some things we'd like to push the state to do. Our partners at Kaufman, we have an opportunity to secure a grant with them. What helps us a great deal to secure those types of grants is to be able to show matching funds. So we have the opportunity to secure some funding if we can find these additional funds. With that, I'll stop talking and take questions.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much. Again, I would note that I am the commission and the county's representative to the board of the Enterprise Center of Johnson County. The $100,000 that you've asked in addition, does that fall into the category that you must match it in order to receive it, or is this just a general operating amount that you desire?
Kaufman hasn't, it's not explicitly in writing that we have to match that. This is the ongoing discussions that we have. There are two other programs. We have in the past secured grants from the Economic Development Agency at the federal level. They do require a one-to-one match. We have hesitated to, there's two opportunities that we sort of passed on. Not the hardest part is securing the match, and it needs to be secured with letters of support when you submit the proposal, or you won't get out of the big stack into the small stack that gets evaluated. So we work with other organizations in our region here, the UMKC Innovation Center. We work with some folks, the Network Kansas folks that work typically in the more rural parts of the state. If we can combine our efforts, there are lots of federal dollars that we simply are leaving on the table for other communities to secure. So we continue to try to figure out where we can find matching dollars. I've requested a pool from Kansas Commerce to be set aside, as some of these other organizations. So when these things, we normally have only about a 4-week to 5-week turnaround. And so when these opportunities come up to secure as much as $2 million, you've got to figure out where in the world would I match $2 million. So we pass on a lot of these.
Thank you. Well, I would also note that you have an outstanding board of directors, individuals who are very, very familiar with and active, if not in the entrepreneurial world, and understand completely the necessity of being able to promote and help beginning businesses in many different ways. So, and I think Sherry does a great job with the Women's Network, as you've indicated. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Allenbrand.
Mr. Chairman, you might be able to answer, Scott. I'm just trying to understand, so do we already give them funding that's been approved, that's in our budget, or?
Yeah, the current amount is 682, I believe.
Correct.
And it's been that level for a number of years. If you go back, well, as long as I've been in budget, it was in the 300s, and the state, I believe, during the Brownback era, cut back their funding, and we picked that up. And I think that's when we went to the 600.
Okay.
And we also started doing a grant match program of about 100,000, I think.
It's 150. So
150,
yeah,
yeah.
the operating is 532,000, and then the grant matching is 150, and that gets you to the 682,000.
But prior boards determined when the state funding went away that it was worth it to keep them afloat and not diminish them. So.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Srcfp.
Yeah, I just want to get it clear, because it's kind of, so basically, there's two different programs that you want additional, okay, you have 53, I get my glasses on.
Yeah, it's 53,000 ongoing that they're requesting just for their operations, and then an additional 50,000 for the matching. So it would take the matching piece from 150 to 200,000.
So basically, the unfunded is 103. You're not listing what we are funding.
It is. It's on the first page, or that 682,000. That is what we are currently funding. Yeah, it's on. Yeah, it's on both. Yes.
And one of the rationales for the one time was all of the work we do would qualify under, and I think I always want to say, is it ARPA? It qualify under the federal funds that the county received.
Yeah.
All of ours would fall under business stabilization or business growth or things along those lines. So Go ahead, Mario, sorry.
Chairman, if I may provide a little bit of more information, a little bit of context, and take the board back to budget deliberations last year. Towards the end of those, we had some discussion about some one-time adjustments for, I believe, 3 of our outside-funded entities. We kind of deferred those decisions, because the proposal that staff brought forward was, if the board so chose to do that, that could be an appropriate use of some of our federal funds. Next week, during the budget deliberations, intend to come back with a conversation about the framework for now the use of the local fiscal recovery funds, the $117 million. Staff are looking at priorities for some reinvestment in the community, consistent with the intended purpose of those funds. Looking at 3 priority areas: housing, workforce development, and small business assistance as one category, and then childcare as the pressing needs in the community. So I intend to bring back, as part of that proposal, some for the board's consideration, some funding opportunities for the Arts Council of Johnson County, UCS, and the Enterprise Center in Johnson County, consistent with those 3 identified priorities. So an opportunity to make some adjustments to the base, if you so choose, and then obviously some one-time funds. So I've been in conversation with Jeff and intend to have that conversation next week. But again, if the board so chooses, we have some flexibility within those funds to make some of these decisions.
Thank you.
I just want to highlight the Srcfp, doesn't live far from me. And when her and her husband were talking about this business, I'm like, what? You're creating bracelets to scare away sharks, and you're based in Northeast Johnson County? And then I thought, wow, man, this is going under COVID. But I mean, they have been due to your help. And then they took the Kauffman Entrepreneurs Program. They went through your training. So right here in Northeast Johnson, we're making, we have a profitable business so that we can all go swim in the ocean when we go to Florida.
Yeah. The ideas that we see stretch from shark bracelets to RDO Medical, which has developed a device to prevent aneurysms, and we'll do their medical device here. Yesterday, we presented to a company, our Angel Network, that has invented the most intelligent chessboard in the world, and patented the ability to touch a piece on the board, and a number of moves will light up. These were 4 former Garmin folks that worked in a skunk tank environment at Garmin and took this technology at Garmin's blessing and have created it. One of the poorest things we do, and I don't mean to get us off the subject, is we're not good at telling the success stories that we have here, that people can invent shark repellent bracelets and produce them here. And we have people who can create the smartest, intelligent chessboard in the world. Matter of fact, they put it in an online campaign, had 7,000 orders before it was created, and helped them raise $1.7 million and get launched. So we need to do a better job of saying, that's right here in the middle of Johnson County, that we have people with that kind of intelligence and that kind of technical skills. Sorry,
right.
I'll get off that.
Mr. Ashby, if you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Srcfp, how long have you been executive director now? 3 years?
You're going to tell me it seems like forever, right?
Whoa, good
July.
one.
I came over from the UMKC Innovation Center and took over the Enterprise Center in July of 2019.
So 3 years?
Yeah, about 3 years.
Okay.
Seems like a lifetime to me.
Well, just, isn't this your first time live for a budget presentation?
No, I was here last time. I recall the masks and the shields.
Okay, very
yeah.
good, very good. I wanted to acknowledge, and you've done a good job, and Enterprise Center always does a good job showing the return on investment and the impact that your work has on promoting companies, and the success rate is pretty high, phenomenally high. It seems like you have the touch, the Midas touch, so I very much appreciate that. But the question that I've raised with your predecessors, and I continue to struggle with, is have you ever considered modifying your business model, and rather than, as your mission statement says, lessening the burden on government, leveraging and I'm going to use the term exploiting, but participating in this wealth creation that you are helping so many companies with to benefit yourself directly and get out of using governmental funds altogether?
Obviously, it's a discussion that we've had. I think last time we spoke, there are some real SEC rules and regulations that we have to be careful of. We are not a fund, and intentionally don't want to be a fund. The way the Angel Network works is we gather, last Tuesday, we probably had 40 individuals at our meeting. We meet once a month. We present 2 companies to that group. Those members decide whether they are even interested enough to consider moving forward and making an investment.
That's the Angel Investor Program.
That's the Mid-America Angels. Mhm. So we have that chapter here in Kansas City, which is our largest. We have a chapter in St. Joe, Missouri, small chapter in Topeka, Kansas. And then we have the Women's Capital Connection, which is all women investors who will only invest in women-led companies, or at least a woman that's part of that senior management team. All of those groups, those individuals make the decision. We facilitate getting them together. We source, we'll look at we'll screen 120 companies a year to put about 30 in front of that group, and then they make the decision. That keeps us out of the purview of the SEC with respect to running a fund. Traditionally, we have not taken an overhead, an administrative percentage if there's an exit. And the only time there would be a return is an exit. The company gets acquired or goes public, but more likely gets acquired. When there's an exit and capital is returned, we cover our expenses that we've incurred over the years of that investment. We're investigating remodeling that a bit to not only take direct expenses, but the overhead expense. Our controller spends part of her time. Sherry probably spends part of her time. I spend part of my time. We have a young man that is our financial analyst. His time. We will look to recover some of that overhead. We just have to walk a fine line. We can't. Your typical fund manager it takes 2%, a 2% carry on anything. We can't do that because of SEC rules. Or I would have to find somebody who's passed all the Series 7 and is a full financial advisor. We can't afford them, and it wouldn't be a good fit for them. But we are going to revamp the model. Our members pay $1,500 a year to belong, so that gets them those 12 meetings a year to see 2 companies. We provide dinner because the meetings last about 2 to 2.5 hours. If you were to make a single investment as an angel investor, you'd probably spend more than that with your attorney to review the paperwork because we handle all of it. So we just sent out 900 K1s to 300 different investors. So we've got to revamp the model. I think when they formed it 16 years ago, nobody envisioned what it would look like when you've had 350 members, 200 and so that aren't anymore, but I still have to manage that and do the administration. So Sherry and I and others have started that re-engineering process to say, what does the new version of an angel network need to look like? My goal is to make that cover itself, a standalone entity that we don't have to cover those expenses. That'll require revamping the way it works, as well as finding more new members, which is what we need to do as well. The more members we have, the more likely we can fund more companies.
Well, I think this question has come up for several years.
Yeah.
And
I promise you I'm tackling it.
part of the answer is if we change that structure, then we're working with the SEC
The other would be,
regulations to comply with. You're having additional legal fees you're going to have to pay, so.
yeah, we need outside counsel a lot. And today we have 2 members who provide, they're retired, so they don't provide legal advice, but they clearly can keep us on the rails. There would be more expense for us. We have looked at becoming a fund, go raise money and be a fund, and there's others filling that space over the last few years that we partner with, and it makes more sense. I started to bring Dr. Fernando, who is RDO's founder, with me. Nick tells a great story Dr. Fernando tells a great story as to he couldn't have gotten started without us. Now, when he got started, he was talking about medical devices that require FDA approval and a lot of money to ever get there, but he just secured his first FDA approval on his device to prevent aneurysms. He's going to build his manufacturing facility here purposely because of the support he's got here, and those are the wins. But I'll tell you, I can list nine that didn't win that our investors put. It's more likely that we have those that fail than we have those that succeed. The game is to get yourself in about 10 to 12. You hope one is a home run. You hope 2 are as a single, and the other 9 are going to fail.
Okay, all right, thank you. Are there other questions? All right, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Jeff.
Appreciate it.
All right, now we're going to move on to wastewater, and Leslie and Susan and Dave Nauman are going to come up to the table.
I'm thinking midnight.
I know.
Hi, I'm Leslie Friedel with Budget and Financial Planning, and we're here to present wastewater. With me today is Susan Pekarik, the General Manager, and Dave Nauman from 1898 and Company. And the very first slide I will go over, and that is basically just to cover the budget over the last 3 years. Their O&M, wastewater has 2 budgets, an operating budget and a capital budget. Their O&M budget was $77 million in 2021. It dropped to $64 million in '22, and then it's back up slightly to $65 million in '23 for the proposed budget, and we'll go through what is causing those changes. The 64 drop was because we have been able to reduce our reliance on
Leslie,
casing.
could you speak closer to the
Oh,
microphone?
sorry. Then for Srcfp, which is their capital budget, it starts out at $147 million in '21, it drops to $125 million in '22, and then back up to $200 million in '23. These actual amounts may fluctuate based on the timing of bond issuance, because much of that number is either for debt service or for the bond issues to finance the capital projects. The last thing I would have to say is that there are 237 FTEs in '21 and '22, and we are projecting that to go up by 1 to 238 in 2023 for a project engineer. And at that point, I will turn it over to Susan, and she will go over the performance measures and the key points.
All right, thank you very much, Leslie. Susan Pekarik with Wastewater. So we have the slide with the performance measures before you. Actually, this is the scorecard, which is the high-level version of our performance measures. And so we have our performance measures. They're organized around 4 areas: our customers and stakeholders, finance, internal business processes, and employee and organizational capacity. So starting with customers and stakeholders, as you can see, yellow denotes an area where we're watching that. We're below our target, but we are steady. In fact, in the customer service area, our trends are increasingly moving upward toward our goal. Our goals around water quality remain steady and above our goals. Every year, I know we talk about this, and we have over 200,000 individual compliance items as part of our discharge permits. And once again, our facilities are receiving peak performance awards this year, including 3 platinum awards. And then the blue color denotes areas where we have a performance measure that we will be developing or is in development. And that one, for customers and stakeholders, is related to education and outreach. We did continue to pause that last year with the pandemic ongoing. For finance KPIs, they remain strong. Dave will be covering these in a little more detail in his presentation, so I won't go over those in detail here. When it comes to internal business processes, our plan reviewers continue to exceed our levels of service when responding to private sewer main extension and commercial projects. And we also remain steady in exceeding our goals when it comes to asset management. For employee turnover, we do remain below our target. However, we are seeing more staff leave for higher pay. I'm going to speak to that in just a moment. And we also continue to pause expanding our training goals. However, we are working on this year. As we look at our accomplishments, so if you can advance that one, thank you. So as we look at our accomplishments, we certainly are incredibly proud. We've talked about this quite a bit this spring. We're incredibly proud to have delivered the Tomahawk Creek Wastewater Treatment Facility on time and on budget for our ratepayers and for our stakeholders. For the Nelson Wastewater Treatment Facility renewal, which is our next largest facility project, we have secured 49% of the project financing through WIFIA. That was closed last month. This financing approach has several benefits, including the flexible and customized repayment, as well as the low-interest loan that's tied to the Treasury rates. It's estimated to save approximately $80 million over traditional general obligation bond financing. We are proud that while we continue to meet or exceed our levels of service in nearly all areas, as well as executing our integrated plan with large treatment facility projects, we do remain among the lowest in our lowest median user bill in the region, and Dave will cover that a little more in his presentation. We do face some challenges, however, that do present risk and can erode our levels of service. Retention of current employees remains one of our challenges, with staff leaving for higher pay to other utilities or other industries altogether. Recruitment has also been a concern for several positions in our O&M division in particular. Inflation and rising interest rates, supply chain issues, they're all risks to our integrated plan, as well as our ability to deliver service at the same level that we currently are. Dave will speak to these risks a little more in his presentation. I'll simply say that we are seeing those impacts in projects as we brought them before you after bidding, as well as projects that we're trying to do in-house. And with that, I'll turn it over to, I think I turn it back to Leslie to wrap up the slides, and then Dave will take over. Thank you.
Yes, this is Leslie again, and the RARs that wastewater requested that are all, have all been funded is a project engineer, which they brought forward to you earlier this year in a workload analysis plan that they presented. And then the next three, chemicals for $780,000, sludge and trash for $340,000, and natural gas for $250,000 are all inflationary costs driven by the demand on their operating system. And then the next page of the PowerPoint is their CIP. Again, they're all funded. The plant expansion is $1,755,000 for 23. Sewer expansion is $2.6 million. System-wide projects is $5,634,000. And then the last one, which is very large, your general renewal and replacement, includes your Nelson Wastewater Treatment Facility, and it's almost $121 million, $129,001. And with that, we can turn it over to Dave unless the chair or somebody has any questions. I should make one more note. When I said 1898 and Company, I think there was some confusion because it's part of Burns and Mack. And so that's why the next slides will say Burns Mack.
Okay, let's go ahead and continue.
Good afternoon, Dave Nauman, 1898 and Company, a part of Burns & McDonnell. It's a pleasure to be with you today to talk about the financial plan for wastewater. We look at this annually. Last year, we anticipated a 5% increase in user charges. After updating all of the assumptions and analysis to current conditions, we continue to propose 5%. As was mentioned earlier, the median residential bill for your wastewater user is among the lowest in the region. We're also going to talk a little bit about connection fees. So this is the charge to connect a new connection to the wastewater system. And we're going to propose an increase in those fees of 5% per year for the next 2 years. We'll talk about the basis for that at the very end. I'd like to start with a little bit of background on what we see happening in the industry. We've shown these statistics before. Roughly a 5% per year increase holds across a number of different indicators, whether it's the water and sewer index, the component of CPI, or the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, cost of clean water, or the AWWA's rate survey, which they do every other year, we can see a long history of about 5% per year across the nation. This is a long-term average trend, and they look backwards. And so as we think about the current conditions with inflation and interest rates, my expectation is in the coming year or so, we'll begin to see some change there.
Excuse me, can you pull the mic more straight in front of you, please? Thank you.
We're on, right? Thank you. The dynamics affecting wastewater's rates are strategic for the most part. There is continued implementation of asset management, which is a proactive way of managing the life cycle costs. The integrated plan achieved regulatory compliance without undue burden at any particular time. It spread that cost over a number of years. You know about the Tomahawk and the Nelson plan coming. All of those are strategic choices that help keep rates stable. The other is we've all, as an industry, benefited from an extended duration of just low interest rates and low inflation, which is currently disrupted. This chart will show you rate increases that were planned in a given year versus rate increases that were implemented. And so the tan bar represents what we anticipated in a given year, and the blue is what was ultimately adopted. And so you can see the history over there. It's bubbled up a little bit in the middle of that plan. That was as the funding started for Tomahawk. In recent years, that requirement on rates has dropped a little bit and is about 5%. As we look forward over the coming years, we anticipate 5% holds, subject to some return to normalcy in inflation and interest rates. And the last piece here on background is your regional bill. Median household user, again, KCW is among the lowest in the region. The last bit of background, one of the things that makes your utility unique is that there are two funds that fund your utility, that they're distinct and separate. Your O&M fund pays for your salaries, wages, materials and supplies associated with running your plant, as well as the Kansas City, Missouri treatment expense. It's measured in KPI mainly on the basis of reserve, and we express that in days. So 90 days to 180 days of O&M is about the target that we shoot for in that fund. And the capital fund, that fund pays for your debt service, and it also cash funds capital projects. And its KPI is debt service coverage, so that's the amount of money left over after paying expenses over your debt service payment. It's got a minimum requirement of 1.1, and for planning purposes, we target a minimum of 1.2. There's been some migration in your cost structure. You're less O&M dependent. It's partly the reason why Leslie was talking about the change in your O&M cost the last year. Because of the benefit of Tomahawk, it's substituted with fixed cost on your debt service and capital fund. Financial planning principles influence the way we look at the long-term plan for wastewater. And our intent is to be prudent in the way that we plan. So we try and balance risks and opportunities in a way that isn't intended to be overly conservative, but hopefully allows us to bring you good news. One of the things that influences us is we prioritize stability in those rate increases. So we levelize those rate plans as much as we can. That can come at the expense of some KPIs. So you'll see some bubbling up in reserves or debt service coverage. That's the alternative, is to measure more specifically to KPIs. That brings higher volatility and rate increases. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but that's really the benefit of the financial planning principles. So let's get into the study findings. This compares revenues under existing rates. Your green represents what we estimated last year. Blue is what we're estimating this year. We're a little bit lower than what we estimated in terms of revenue last year, and that's primarily because of some reductions in wholesale billings as well as commercial. We do see some opportunity. It's something we want to monitor on your residential side. As we all know, work from home has pushed residential usage up. You're billing residential usage on a winter water usage basis. We think we're being conservative there. We'll find out when we get into this next year. We'll take a harder look at that, but preliminary indications are there may be opportunity. Leslie discussed O&M here a moment ago. This stair steps you through the major changes in operating costs. Personnel is among the larger of the adjustments. That will include salary and wage adjustments with current market conditions and benefit costs. County transfer is estimated to be about 3% higher. The remainder of the costs are requests for additional resources. So Leslie mentioned the 1 FTE. There is some savings for KCMO. So last year wasn't a full year of operation. We'll get the benefit of a full year this year, and that will reduce O&M. And then chemical, sludge, and natural gas, all inflationary adjustments for current market conditions. When we look at O&M in total, and again, green was last year's estimate, blue is this year's estimate, we're relatively higher. That's mainly an inflationary dynamic. You will see a little bit more of an increase in 2024. The other influence here is that there's an additional project for the state line that will reduce flow from the pump stations to KCMO, produces savings in operating costs. But the timing of that project has slipped a little bit, and so we have higher increase in 24, and then it comes back down in 25 and 26. I'd like to talk just a little bit about the capital funding strategy. So there's about $1.3 billion in capital projected over the next 10 years. That's adjusted for inflation, and the pie chart represents the primary funding source of the capital projects. So the blue element of that pie chart, about 50% of the funding will come from debt issuance specific to Nelson. Most of that, about half of it, is already procured through the WIFIA fund. The remaining elements of debt there are to be determined. It'll either be GO bonds or potentially KDHE loans. The other half of the capital fund is either funded through cash, so we'll draw down reserves or use cash generated in the current year to fund capital projects. Or there is some additional debt beyond Nelson. Most of that is at the tail end of this 10-year window. The bar chart with the line on the right represents capital spending in the line. And so you can see it increases over the middle of the period and then declines and then increases toward the end. The middle of that period is the build of Nelson. So that's the height of the line. It declines, and then right behind that is the Mill Creek project, and that'll be the next big capital expenditure for wastewater. The blue bar represents reserves. And so what you'll see over the next 3 years in the capital reserve is that we are using a fair amount of cash to bring those reserves down. That's partly feasible because most of the funding for Nelson will be secured in long-term debt, including WIFIA. As we get to the end of the plan and Mill Creek comes into focus, we're pushing reserves back up again to help with liquidity as that project becomes funded. This chart compares debt service. So we have had some changes here. The line represents the projected debt service payment, annual debt service payment by year. The bars represent the current debt service payment estimate. So last year when we were performing the financial plan, the tactics of funding Nelson weren't as understood. We had very basic assumptions for payments in WIFIA, as well as the remaining 51% in Nelson that needed to be funded. That's now better understood, and we're issuing more debt up front. Hopefully, part of that's WIFIA, but hopefully GO or SRF to help lock in perhaps favorable interest rates compared to what may come. And over time, the payments actually decrease slightly compared to what we had previously projected. The risk we have here is where long-term interest rates land. We're estimating about 4.5% on a 20-year bond. There have been periods in history where that's been higher, and it's just something we'll need to manage to. This chart compares total cash obligations for operation, maintenance, and debt against revenue under existing rates at the enterprise level. The revenue is represented in the green line, and the commitments are represented in blue. Obviously, there's a difference there that we fund in part through rate adjustments, and that is shown here. So the green represents the rate increases we anticipated in last year's plan over the next 10 years. Blue represents the current assumption. As you can see, 5% remains the average. And as we look beyond that 10-year window, we do some long-term planning, and subject to reasonable assumptions on inflation and interest rates, we think that 5% holds, but that'll be something we need to manage and monitor. We'll spend a moment on key performance indicators. This is operating reserves as expressed in days. And so you can see in 2021, the peak, we are assuming we're using reserves as a rate stabilization method over the next 10 years. And in raw dollar terms, that means reducing the reserve from about $42 million in today's dollars to about $29 million 10 years from now. On the capital side, the key performance measure is debt service coverage. The bubble that you see in 2022 where we spike is related to the better definition around funding and the timing of capital payments associated with Nelson. So those are delayed a little bit. That metric will come back down to earth in 2023. That brings us to proposed rates. So the primary fees that you have are service charges and volume charges. The service charge is assessed on a bi-monthly basis. Volume charge is per 1,000 gallons. The service charge is projected to go up a little over $1, and the volume charge will increase about 43 cents per 1,000 gallons. In terms of the impact to monthly bills, you can see that median user in the blue box under existing rates is a little over $45. It will go up with the proposed rates about $2.24 a month in 2023. When we layer that extra $2.24 in, it does nudge you a little higher than the NACWA average. I think the NACWA number just came out today or yesterday, so we'll update that. But regionally, again, still competitive after that 5% rate increase. And that assumes that no one else in the area is raising rates, and my expectation is they will be. This is the proposed rate table with the service charge, user charge, and other user charge fees included. And that brings us to connection fees. So connection fees haven't been adjusted since 2014 or 15. We look at connection fees through a process that examines equity in your system and then creates a fee that recovers that equity, puts new customers joining the system at par with the equity created by prior ratepayers. What you see here is a regional comparison. It's the same group that we use in looking at your user charges, but the implementation of connection fees really varies widely. Some utilities use them, many do not. It really depends on the degree of growth in the community. The ones in your region that have comparable connection fees include Olathe and Gardner, and you'll see compared to those two, JCW looks favorable. It's relatively low. Kansas City, Missouri considers connection fees. They've talked about them from time to time, but currently don't have them. Your existing connection fees vary by meter size, and the concept here is the greater the meter, the more the capacity that is there for their benefit. Overall, these fees create about $7 million a year. In funding, that helps fund your capital program. In theory, growth paying for growth. I mentioned the methodology here a moment ago, and when we look at the proposed increases, we would recommend phasing in a 5% increase over the next 2 years. And that is a nice way to step into the change without doing it all at once. And it brings those fees in alignment with what our analysis indicates to be a reasonable position for growth to recover the cost of growth. We'd also recommend evaluating these fees on a 5-year interval. That's about the schedule that JCW has typically been on. When we come back to that regional comparison, what you'll see is with the 2 steps, the 2023 and 2024 connection fee at 5%, for a 5/8 inch connection, a residential connection, you're still lower than both Olathe and Gardner. And I know I went through that quickly. I would be happy to address any questions you may have on connection fees or user charges.
Just for clarification, would you explain the bill that I receive, as I recall, has two numbers, and how are those numbers calculated?
Yeah, we can do it here.
It's sometimes difficult to understand, and I've had several questions, so.
So the service charge is a fixed fee, regardless of usage, and it is proposed to be $20.20 per bi-monthly period. That fee recovers the cost of billing and customer management and customer service, as well as some elements of your volumetric costs that really don't vary much in accordance with use. The remainder of your costs are recovered on a volumetric fee. So for a residential or a multifamily connection, it's based on their winter water use with the intent of capturing the water that is actually going into the sewer in the wintertime, as opposed to summer use where you're watering your lawn or washing a car that doesn't go into the sewer. So they're based on winter water use, and whatever their winter water use is applied against that volumetric rate, it's measured in 1,000 gallons, determines the volumetric fee. Those are the two components of a typical residential bill.
You know, again, it's based upon the water usage that is reflected on your meter from Water One. That's not to say that Water One determines the fee officially, but I've had many instances where folks might say, well, you know, I one case I remember very well. I live by myself. I'm retired. And then as we talked more and more, they mentioned the fact that he had two sons who brought the family laundry over and obviously increased his water usage, so the bill went up. If there's an abnormal increase in that portion of the bill, they should contact Johnson County Wastewater, perhaps have an inspection done to the water meter to make sure that it's recording accurately. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. That's a great summary. If your bill seems abnormally high, please contact our customer service. We can look at not just your winter water usage, but we can look at your usage throughout the year. And there are times, as you state, where perhaps the winter might be a higher usage period for someone, and we can see that throughout the rest of the year that might be a lower usage because they don't have folks, college kids or whatever, living with them. And so we can evaluate that and work with a customer to adjust their bill. And like you say, there are also plumbing leaks. I know personally, I've had a leak in my yard, and so then that can cause your water usage to go up, and then that will affect your wastewater bill as well. And so if you can provide us information to demonstrate you've had a leak and you've had that repaired, again, we can look at your usage and we can make adjustments so that you're not being impacted, by all year long by a leak, for example.
I also remember a situation where there was a dry winter. I'm not sure what year it was, and the property owner had used a lot of water to keep the grass and foliage and trees and everything. So there are, but check it out. That's what our service department is for. So
Exactly.
if you have questions, contact them. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Ms. O'Hara.
The most notorious problem is leaky toilets.
Yes, Ms. Hanslick.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the presentation. Very helpful. As Ms. Pekarik knows, I really love learning about wastewater. And I had a question, though, in regard to the connection fees, because in my district, and I believe probably in Commissioner Fast's district too, we still have quite a few older homes that are still on septic systems. Is there any, under what circumstances might someone want to connect to the JCW system? And is there any program for waiving those fees if it's an existing residential property?
So that's a great question. I appreciate you asking it, because you're right. There are periodically homes that may have remained on septic all these years, and now their septic has failed and they'd like to connect to sewer. Because that fee is really associated so that it's their buy-in essentially, so they're on par with what the other customers are paying, there's not a way to waive that fee. However, we do have financial, or the board has a financial policy that if you're 62 and older, 65 and older, I forget the age, I apologize, that there's actually a discount to the fee, and they can make that application of, I believe it's 50%. So, and that's a septic to sewer program that we have available for those folks.
And I appreciate your mentioning that, because not surprisingly, part of my thought is for some of our older folks who are trying to stay in their homes, and then their septic system fails, and it's very, very expensive to replace it, and makes more sense to connect to the wastewater, public wastewater system. So I probably will be checking in with you to learn more about that program. Thank you.
Question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McCarrick, I'll direct this to you. Feel free to divert it as you deem necessary. But one of the common criticisms of utilities is that they're monopolies. And as monopolies, they have a different perspective on constraints. And just listening to the presentation again this year, we've built in assumptions of 5% increases every year for the foreseeable future. But we've also mentioned how growth should pay for itself and the connection fee, increasing that. So explain to us the mechanisms that are in place, the processes in place that you use to make sure that we are value-driven and don't rely upon monopoly dominance in terms of pricing.
I appreciate that question. Thank you. Well, the main thing that we do as we've come before the board many times a year, but in particular when we present our capital program, is we talk about our asset management system. You know, Johnson County Wastewater serves 500,000 people in the county, and we have multiple facilities, 6 treatment plants, 30 pumping stations, 2,300 miles of sewer line. And that asset value is about $3 billion, and it's important that we manage those assets to their lowest life cycle cost. So we have a very advanced asset management program where we're managing that system to its lowest life cycle cost. And we've talked about some of the ways we use our data to drive our decisions, and that includes things like using data to help us level workload so that we don't have to end up hiring another crew to help maintain our facilities, looking at workload so that we're right-sizing our engineering team and supplementing with consultants for a short period of time because we don't need them for a long period of time, and then we're just requesting, for example, here we're just requesting 1 engineer as we continue to execute that integrated plan. So hopefully that answers your question, or I can go on. If you
One follow-on, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. On slide 4, there were some key points and service challenges, retention and recruiting, and so forth. But in your metrics, you talk about customer satisfaction, both generally and in terms of points of service. How do this year's budget requests address these service challenges and the metrics that you have indicated? Are there new measures or measures needing to be addressed? The satisfaction question.
Sure. So our requests for additional resources when it comes to chemical, sludge, and the personnel requests, those are related to our operations and our execution of our integrated plan. When it comes to overall customer satisfaction, you know, we're looking at things like how is their interaction with our customer service, but we're also asking questions about backups, about odor control. Those are important levels of service that we have for our customers. So chemicals are providing us the ability to make sure we're meeting our permits, you know, protecting the environment, and also helping us with protecting neighborhoods from experiencing odors from our treatment facilities. The engineer obviously will help us execute projects, which will again help us take care of those assets so we can continue doing the other things like meeting our permits.
Thank you.
That help answer your question? Okay.
Ms. McCarrick, our asset management program has not been with us forever. I can't recall the year that, I think John was still the director when we implemented that. How many years ago was that?
Yeah, so John O'Neill, my predecessor, he implemented that, and we started implementing that program in earnest in about 2006, 2007. Prior to that, we had a maintenance program, but really, effectively using our data to drive our decisions was started with John.
I think it's been an excellent program, and hopefully will continue.
Thank you.
Another question, Ms. Fast.
Yeah, I talked to you about if there's possibility of the ARPA funds to provide some sort of incentive program for those families who are in septic tanks. And I know next week we might be talking about ARPA. Have you had the chance to look at that at all?
We've evaluated the data, and I've provided some information to the deputy county manager. So yes, we've taken a look at that.
And so
Keep in mind, I can't remember, Aaron can probably help me. There are a lot of septic tanks across the county with a wide variety of
9,000.
situations. Some of them are.
There's 9,000.
9,000, no, 9,000, thank you, not 8,000, excuse me. And some of them are more in the unincorporated area, more rural areas, but then there are, as you were pointing out earlier, Commissioner Hanslick, I think you have the individual homeowner who might have been in a neighborhood where sewers weren't available when the home was constructed, but now they are, and so there's a great deal of data to sift through, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Well, and not all of those want to be on the sewer
Correct.
system, or,
Yes,
and so, and then some of those are rural, and, yeah, I guess, I've been asking for this, would like to have some sort of proposal or discussion at some point on this.
One of the main areas we've talked about are the areas near the Nelson facility where we're getting ready to reconstruct, and those are the conversations we've been having with county manager.
There are a lot of areas north of 87th Street, I think, in the county, across city boundaries, where there's still a lot of septic tanks in use.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Ms. Allenbrand?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Hanslick, where did you get that number? And does that also include the,
On the website.
is that unincorporated too? Wow, it's really not that bad if you think about the whole population.
600,000 people.
Okay, well, just to make sure I understand, there were no unfunded requests, is that right?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know what I mean?
Let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back.
They don't want.
Thank you all.
As a lot of them are great job though, and they're incorporating in, they're starting to.
We will once again reconvene from our recess, and so we're ready for the next item.
Okay. Our first up for infrastructure after wastewater is airport, and I'll turn it over to Mark Dapp.
Mark Dapp with Budget and Financial Planning. For the airport budget in FY 2023, there's an increase of roughly $1 million of the FY 22 approved amount. The majority of this increase is related to transfers for capital projects. That's about $600,000 of the increase. The remainder of the increase is attributable to capital service or contractual services, specifically for maintenance of the New Century office building out at New Century. You also see that this relates to the tax support amount that increases from $1.0 million in 2022 to $1.5 million as recommended in 2023. That is to offset the lost revenue and the increased expenses for maintaining that property. I'll turn it over to Aaron Otto, the Executive Director.
Good afternoon, Aaron Otto with the Airport Commission. I'll try to breeze through this as quickly as I can and then stand by for any questions you may have. Just to look at some of our organizational scorecard matrix, obviously it's not fun to start off with the first one being red. The first one being red is largely and almost completely driven by the fact that we have an expectation the business park generates revenue to support the airports. Well, because of the vacancy in 600 New Century Parkway, that is not happening to the level it needs to in order to be a yellow or even green factor, and it's such a heavy weighted factor. That's why that one turned red since last year. I'm looking down at a couple of the lower ones where you see the yellow in operational effectiveness. Those are largely driven by aging equipment and the fact that in the 55-year history of the Airport Commission as of next month, only one building has ever been built by the Airport Commission. It turns 26. Everything else that the Airport Commission manages is turning 80 years old this year. And so those are weighting factors on some of those operational efficiencies, both dollar-wise for maintenance, but also for effectiveness in the use of the building. I think the rest of the scorecard we're happy to walk through however much you'd like, but I'm pretty satisfied with the rest of the world. We know where our targets need to be, that when 600 becomes either in a back to condition or not a condition, that top one will change green. Those two on the yellows will be harder factors to work on, but they do bring attention to where we have some challenges. You want to go to the next slide? A lot of accomplishments, just point out a couple. I thank most of you for joining us for the air show last year. It did turn out to be one of the largest in North America, both on attendance, but also based on the number of performers. As a selfless plug, Labor Day weekend 2022, the Thunderbirds will be back at New Century. When we look at this, the rest of the items in this budget, after both kind of past accomplishments, it really is addressing long-term challenges. When I got out to the airport back in 2016, we really didn't have well documented how to address some of the very much aging infrastructure that was out there. And in some cases, we're still working on trying to crack that nut. But we've created budgets that have gone from crawling to walking to I think we've reached the running point. Still, little skips here every once in a while that we have to work on. One of them is that second bullet there, and we're hopefully very optimistic about this. The second bullet talks about, that your airport system continued to be the busiest in the state. New Century had 71,000 takeoff and landings last year. Executive Airport was just shy of 44,000. Put the two together for 115, that makes it the busiest system in the state. The next two bullets, those were about $4.3 and $5.5 million projects at Executive. That was 100% federally funded through grants. The next bullet talking about safety gates, that was also something that was about 2/3 funded by a KDOT grant trying to reduce runway incursions at both airports. And the list goes on, but in many cases, we're again trying to address some long-term legacy issues out at both of the two airports. The last one I'm particularly proud about because it talks about private sector investment. The first new big box hangar, big box being around 30,000 foot, since 1997 was completed just in the last couple months. It's got a TCO. Another one's being constructed, and then a smaller dual bay hangar is just finishing as well at New Century. So to have three in the state of construction and one just being finished here is pretty remarkable. And then last but not least, it's not in the slide, and you'll hear more about it next year, is we did have our groundbreaking for the east side development of the master developer just this last May 17th, and it seemed to not rain every day since. So yeah, here we are. Challenges the organization faces, I mentioned earlier, literally it was the summer of 1942 that the maintenance building at New Century, the water pump station, the backup water pump station, the admin building, all were built by the United States government. And so they turn 80 years old, and we're looking to have a little anniversary party, both celebrating the 80 years of history of Olathe Naval Air Station, but also the 55 years of the Airport Commission later this year. That does include not just the buildings, but talking about the rail, the T-hangars, some of which date back to the early 1970s at Exec, for example, water pipes and other road infrastructure. One of the other concerns, and you see some of these that come up, are adjacent land use, and there is a study being done to update the compatibility land use study for both airports and kind of the review of what's the most compatible best use of land around the county's airports. There is some expansion limitations. I mean, we own the land that we own, and with the exception of one piece, it's probably about as big as it will ever get in terms of possible development. And then, last but not least, I can't not mention the 600 New Century Parkway building, which continues to be marketed and still a fiscal challenge, to say the least, just on OpEx alone, let alone the lost rent that was coming off that building. Our RARs, there was one request. Right now, it's estimated that to operate the building in a mothball status at 600 New Century Parkway and to pay for the previous rent that was coming in, it's a $2.7 million hit. In 2021 and 2022, the county was very generous to give $1 million towards it. The Airport Commission asked for the full reimbursement for it, and the county was willing to do another $500,000 in the manager's budget, and we were very grateful for that additional support. So it's still a shared expense for both entities, for sure. CIP, this is the one I'm pretty excited about and want to highlight if it will come true. We do operate, there's about 180 contract towers in the United States. 2 of them are your towers, one of which we own, well, technically we rent, which is the 1942 tower at New Century. That will be up for a grant to replace it because it really is functionally obsolete. If you haven't been there, I'd be happy to show you, and very quickly your own eyes will see why it has challenges. It's estimated to be between a $6 to $9 million replacement project. And there are a couple opportunities in the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, which is a 5-year program, to apply for complete reconstruction of a hangar like that, an air traffic control tower. So we have put in for the first round of that. We'll see what comes from that, and if we don't make it, get feedback, and we'll apply again. But that's the match to the minimum of what we think it will cost to build a new tower at New Century. The rehabilitation of K&L light system, Kimo and Lima, over at New Century, those are direct buried lines. And if you know anything about water and electric lines, they don't do well together. So this will both replace this multi-decade-old system with actual lines buried in conduit. And then the New Century Water Systems request is, we have a genset over there that we know is 26 years old. That's when we got it, but we bought it used. So it's pushing its high 30s, and this is a genset to back up the water system. So if the power goes down, water still pumps, because in our case, we have to pressurize everything through pumps. We don't do any elevated storage. So there was design in the system to have 2 generators. The second one's never been purchased, and so we're going to look at trying to put one more online as a backup based on the age of the other one in 2023. And I do apologize. Sometimes you see me come up with different dates. A lot of it comes back to the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. And in many cases, when the FAA brings different grants, when the opportunity comes up for a 90% grant match, some of our years have to slip around. So we do our best guess in the CIP. We've mentioned what are the next biggest concerns. That's what you're seeing here. But you may see me come back and have to flip a couple of these in the future, just because the other side of the banker equation has got available dollars, and you take them when you can get them. I'm pleased to share in this first one, we just received a $1.4 million grant from KDOT for rail, which is a huge deal for us. And this will be the first time we start replacing legacy rail, the actual sticks, not just ties, not just ballast, not resurfacing. So this $275 plus some dollars we've saved from the previous year in maintenance will go towards matching that grant. So that's very exciting. The second one on here is really authorization only for phase 2 on the east side development. Again, if the infrastructure all being paid similar to phase 1, with the revenues off the ground rents plus the increment of tax from the county's general fund that would come off of that space. This is just authorization. You have an approved plan 2 that will come up, as a project in the future. But the suggestion was to put each of the next 4 phases, 1 per year, just so that they're lined out and kind of the plan that's been approved and programmed. The last is a vault. We did get a KDOT grant for replacing a multi-decade-old vault where all the electrical systems are for the airfield at Exec, and we'll probably put in to KDOT for a similar one at New Century because of its age. Then on the last slide, the construction of Taxiway Alpha is coming up. Foxtrot over at Exec. That's one of the last pieces of pavement that hasn't been updated. And again, Exec is really becoming reset as an almost new airport with the amount of infrastructure improvements that the FAA and KDOT and the county have put into it. Our Srcfp plan, that's something we did not have until a few years ago, trying to start putting dollars aside for these 80-year-old structures and the equipment that we run, much of which meets or, this is just for the buildings. The next fund is we did not have an equipment reserve built up, and we can't participate in the county's equipment reserve since we're an enterprise fund, so we've set up our own. And that, too, is to try to take care of and maintenance equipment that meets all of the county's fleet requirements in terms of age or mileage before we do any replacement work on them. So those two are good to have. They do cost money. In the past, they weren't quite being used, but I'm glad they're in place today. That's a general overview. Happy to go through anything more you'd like in detail, and thanks for your time today.
Mr. Otto, I don't know what station I was listening to the other day, but I heard them announce some of the awards for the rails from the state of Kansas, and I didn't hear New Century, so I'm glad we made the list.
Yeah, we took, to put it in perspective, 1 out of every $5 that they had available, which is amazing. So we've received 2 of those in the last 2 years, and we'll keep the fingers crossed for more. To put in perspective, to replace the rail system in its entirety is a $6 to $7 million project. And so this is about $600,000 of it will go into that. The rest is ties and other, support, but that's important. I just want to, I forgot one other number because this is an incredible year. So in our CIP budget for FY23, we have roughly $1.5 million of sources, revenue that's internal to the county, enterprise fund, self-generated, whatever the case is. That pulls down a total of $8.83 million. So for every dollar that we're putting in, we're pulling down $4 from the federal government, assuming everything gets funded the way we hope, or from the Department of Transportation for the state. And that's not every year is that good of rate of return, but it's always better than 1-to-1. It's usually better than 2-to-1. But to get a year that's 4-to-1, I just wanted to stop and admire that delta, if you will, of returning, in what cases are many tax dollars coming out of either the refueling of planes at one of the airports or other general taxes coming back to Johnson County.
Okay, thank you. Ms. O'Hara.
Any bites on the New Century building?
Not as of late. We're working on 2 new appraisals, as we talked about with you all at our joint meeting. I've got one of them back, and I'm still waiting on the other, which should be soon. But that might be a point where there's an opportunity for, frankly, a price reset on the sale value. So that's where we're at this point.
Remind me what the sale value is right now.
But it's unlisted. If somebody called and
Okay.
asked, we would tell them close
All
to
right.
what the appraisal
Okay,
value was before.
Thank you. That's all I need to know.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Allen Brand.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Otto, just thank you and your staff for your continued work of, getting these grants. Not everybody could do that, and I know that you work hard, and it's a great commission. I am the liaison over the airport, and you guys work so hard, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
It's fast.
Yes, as the person who brought up getting a new appraisal many times last year, so thank you for moving forward on that. What is your thoughts in terms of once that's completed, what will be the next steps?
So I think I want to be a little careful about putting a negotiation strategy on an open meeting that's recorded. I would just say the next step would be looking at what those appraisal values come in. If they've changed because of COVID, since the other appraisals were done pre-COVID, then potentially considering a different value that the building could be for sale for. And then from there's a couple other steps that could happen, but that's my belief of what will happen based on what this feedback is from those new appraisals. So that might give the real estate agents something new to go out to people that are saying, we might be interested, but not at this value. Are you interested at this value? And see if that works.
Thank you.
Mr. Ashcraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Otto, you started your presentation by saying the business objective goal of RED was not fun, and I can understand your perspective, but I think it's important to put that out front and center, which I know you are. It's something that just not you and the Airport Commission and we are aware of, but it's an issue for the community. So don't be discouraged. I've got every confidence that you'll move us forward if at all possible. I did want to ask you, though, about the operational effectiveness, and I had noticed that the safety and quality standards had shifted from green to yellow. Do you feel that the RARs that you've put forward will address that or partially address that issue, or will they address other issues?
Is there any specific measure that you were most concerned about?
I'm looking at the business objective, maintain high safety and quality standards. You've got a number of RARs. Well, how many of those will go to improving or stabilizing particularly the safety and quality issues?
So there's two in particular. I think there are 4 measurements within that bucket. There are 2 in particular. One has to do with the number of derailments, which speaks back to the quality of age of rail and really the weight of the rail. We did have a derailment last year, which was the really first time that's happened since I've been out there. It was not a tip over, it wasn't a spill, but it was a case which technically would qualify as a derailment. So the fact that we're putting, the RAR helps put dollars into the budget that can be used for things like matching the KDOT grant to replace rail makes me feel better that we're starting to address some of that legacy issue, for example.
But I thought I understood you say that that's only partial of what you need to.
It is.
Okay.
That's as much as we frankly could match. Their fund was $5 million. We got 840, and then we put in the balance. And so if we had more money to match, we could have asked for more money. We did tell them in our plan, this is step 2 of 4, trying to say, don't be surprised when you see us again. And
Thank you.
We'll see where that lands.
Other questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Otto.
Thanks for your day.
Okay, up next is Planning, Housing, and Community Development, and also Contractor Licensing, and Mark Dapp will start us off.
Mark Dapp, Budget and Financial Planning. For planning, housing, and community development, there is an increase of roughly $1.3 million between FY22 and FY23 expenditures. The overwhelming majority of that is attributable to grant funds, specifically in housing and community development. You'll notice that the local tax support increase is roughly $500,000, and that is related to the RAR for the zoning and subdivision regulations update, which will be covered in greater detail. Contractor licensing is up slightly in FY 2023. This is essentially accounting for normal growth. There was a slight decrease in the fees that were charged in FY 2022, which drove down revenues. As historic growth continues, that amount is projected to increase slightly in FY 2023. That program is entirely fee-funded, and the revenues drive the expenditures. On the FTE slide, you'll see that both programs are consistent across all 3 years, and Jay Leipzig, Director of Planning, is here for further information.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Jay Leipzig, Planning Department. My comments today will be very brief. I feel like I've been in front of you so often this past year. It's been a challenging year in planning, to say the least. It's been a great year and very, very productive year. So I wanted to start off with our organizational scorecard. One of the things I'm especially proud of this year is as we brought in housing, we did a strategic plan with our department, bringing in the various divisions together and really about re-engaging the staff together as a group in terms of how we can think creatively about problems and solving and discovering solutions for problems that we have in the county, such as affordable housing, as you're well aware of that. I did want to apologize for the vision statement in this organizational scorecard did not, the final one did not make it into the draft that's in the budget book. Just talking about the various components: financial stability, customer satisfaction, operational effectiveness, and staff development. We have made strides in all of those areas and are continuing to improve and always working on efficiency, especially plan review and organizational efficiency within the department. Linda, oh, there we go. Okay. Just a brief overview of accomplishments for the department. As I said, it was a very productive year, a very busy year in the planning department. We completed the strategic plan, which really is the basis for as we move forward and further refine all of our processes. Also, we developed online education classes through contractor licensing. That's something we were essentially forced to do with the pandemic. However, it's something as we work through the strategic plan for contractor licensing, I really think that is an effective medium that we're going to be using more in the future. I think the tough part of that will be figuring out the ideal class size so that's a combination or a hybrid component of using both in-person and hybrid learning. We also worked on the website upgrade. We completed the audit of our rural comprehensive plan and subdivision regulations. This is kind of the first step in looking at our subdivision regulations. In other words, trying to determine what the problem areas are, areas that we really need to focus on, and help us prioritize those items as we move forward. Also develop the amendments to the comprehensive plan and the subdivision regulations in regard to solar, which we just finished up. And an item that was on for agenda review this morning is to, and hopefully for approval next week, is to complete the upgrade or start the upgrade for the airport compatibility plans. That is a huge step for us, something we planned on doing for quite some time, and beginning that process and working through that with our consultant. The other piece that I would note, that specialized work, that is something that's fairly specific. We have a great planning staff we've assembled, but we're general planners, and that type of work is very detailed. It requires a high level of skill and knowledge that's actually very specific for airport operations and land uses and FAA compliance. So that's an important piece of it. And our expenditure rates for CDBG and home funds continue to be very, very good, very effective. I'm also very pleased and happy to continue the work with the Housing Subcommittee. I think that group has been, it's a fantastic group to work through some of the problems with affordable housing in the county, and they're difficult problems, but I think it's a matter of thinking creatively about how we can move forward and how we can solve some of the problems that we have in the county. Service challenges for us, obviously staff shortages and recruiting has been difficult. COVID-19 has been a difficult challenge for us although we've been able to accommodate most of our meetings through online platforms and through Zoom. The public hearing is still a very difficult thing. It's difficult to have a public hearing in a hybrid format, and there's really no way to get around that. So we're always looking at alternatives, but that has been a challenge for us as well. The other piece mentioned that I'm particularly proud of is just increasing transparency this year in our planning department, with having all of our planning commissions televised or over Zoom, so that they're available for the public to listen in and also make comments. We're also, all of our zoning board meetings will be in a hybrid format as well. So this is something new that we haven't done until this past year, but the pandemic has expanded our knowledge, I think, in that technology. And I think just getting more public participation in these projects is really the key aspect as we move forward. Just a quick overview on the CIP that I wanted to mention. It was recommended for $500,000 for a zoning and subdivision regulations update. And there again, this is kind of the next step, and the advantage with that is this is specialized work. There are a lot of areas that our subdivision regulations need to be updated, and so they're consistent with state and federal law. For example, with our sign code regulations, need expansive revisions.
Can you say that again? I missed what.
Our sign regulations?
That's what I thought you said.
For signage. Yeah, as an example, and it's something that there are certain legal cases that really restrict signage throughout the country, and it's a factor that planning departments have struggled with for quite some time in terms of how those signs are regulated, the sizes, the wording of those signs, because there's free speech implications. There's a variety of things there that have to be integrated. And so it's not just the Johnson County, this is throughout the country, kind of looking at those type of issues. Also setback changes, regulations, incorporating accessory structures we have, and it seems like every week we have an item for accessory use or some type of change with that, and kind of looking at those changes and how we can better standardize those. It's been quite some time since we've looked at that, so those are long overdue to be reviewed. So this, as I said, this update to our subdivision regulations is our next step as we go through that process, and it will be that's a long-term process. We will go through our airport compatibility plans, begin that process this summer, hopefully. If that item is approved, we would start in July of 2022, would finish up in the third quarter of 2023, and then during that time, beginning next spring, we'll start working on the subdivision regulations as well. So there will be some overlap between those two, but integrating those projects together will be a key part of that. With that, I'll stop and take any questions you might have.
Questions? Ms. O'Hara?
On the land use around the airports, isn't this kind of like the horse is already out of the barn and now we're shutting the door?
No, this compatibility piece, and there again, that's specialized work. All of those plans have to be integrated together, and so our number one priority of the county should be to protect our airport, and the uses within the airport and surrounding the airport. And so to say the horse is out of the barn, no, I think they could be very compatible together. I think it's something, having regulations and looking at how we can refine those processes as well, because, and I'm there again, my focus has always been on reducing the time for plan review, things that we can do to expedite that process, I think is the key, and that's where that's a key part of that as well.
But the density and there's uses that's in the flight path now that is troubling. I mean, we've been discussing this. So anyway, and then on licensing, does the licensing part, do they have their own reserves?
Yes, they do, Commissioner. It's an enterprise fund. It's entirely self-funded through licensing fees through that program. Yes, so they're
not in danger of losing those reserves, are they? I'd had a conversation with someone that's connected with that, and they didn't want anything happening to their reserves like happens on the state level, that the governor can sweep those funds. And
No.
so they don't want to have any raids on their funds.
No, and those funds, as an enterprise fund, it has to be used for contractor license
Right.
activity.
And signage, is that like billboards?
It can be billboards, but it's a lot of even business type signage. When you think of billboards, as an example, you see digital signs throughout the country with changeable text and messages. Our current subdivision regulations don't have any parameters for digital signage. And so that's just an example, whether we'd want to do that or not, but it's an example of something that is really changing.
I don't think folks out in the rural area would appreciate signs that were flickering around.
Yes, although we've received some inquiries about that.
Interesting, okay. And the 500,000, is there any way that we could pare that down?
I think
$500,000 seems like a lot, and I would assume that there's already published documents as to the necessity to revisit our standards, and that we could be utilizing that instead of hiring consultants.
I appreciate the question, Commissioner. One of the $500,000 figure came from the firm that did our subdivision regulations audit, kind of looking at just best practices based upon the size of the county, the work that would be involved. However, I will say I'm always try to be very careful and prudent with those funds, because if we're able to do it
In-house.
internally, that would be terrific, as much as we possibly can. As I said, there are some things that are specialized activities that require some specialized knowledge, which we, as general planners, would not have. But certainly, we always look for any avenues that we can to save money.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Leipzig, I've got a number of questions about both the dashboard and scorecard, but to expedite the meeting, maybe we could meet offline.
Sure, be happy to, sir.
Any other questions?
Chairman, I had one thing to interject. Add to what Jay said, on contractor licensing, that program was set up by board resolution. and that's why the funds are restricted. So to get to Commissioner O'Hara's question, it would require board action for those to be spent on anything other than contractor licensing. So they're not, it's,
Contractor licensing.
right, but you guys could change it, but nobody else could, basically.
I hope that doesn't happen, because that would be using someone else's money for a process that's not associated, could be
Yeah,
not
and
associated.
there have been no discussions about that I'm aware of by staff or on the Thursday by you guys. So, but it is technically, that's BOCC driven, not state statute driven.
Well, tell the board we're not going there. Thank you. Ms. Hanslick.
Thank you. I just want to take the opportunity, since Mr. Leipzig's here, to thank him and his staff for taking on the responsibility of housing. How long has it been since housing's been a couple of years? A
Commissioner,
year?
just a little over about a year and 4 months.
That's what I thought, and I really appreciate your undertaking the leadership in housing, and I've really appreciated working with you and your staff with the Housing Subcommittee, and I've seen your personal interest in this. You go above and beyond to look at options, and so thank you. It's a very difficult subject and a very difficult challenge, but I appreciate your expertise and your enthusiasm.
Thank you. I will say it's a great team in housing, and I've spent quite a bit of time assembling that team, and not only in housing but in planning as well, and getting the people in place.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, up next is Public Works, and Mark Dapp will start us off again.
For Public Works in FY 2023, you'll see that there is a decrease of roughly $800,000 between the 2 years. This is primarily due to the RAR for fleet replacement funding being generated from the general fund in lieu of the Public Works Fund. That request will be detailed greater on slide 4. That decrease is partially offset by the standard growth in salaries and wages, and also the transfer to capital projects that is up slightly. You also see that there's an FTE decrease of roughly 0.25 positions. That is a transfer between the Public Works Department and the Stormwater Fund. So with the next department, you'll see that corresponding offset on the increase. And Brian Pedig, Director of Public Works, is here for further information.
Good afternoon, Brian Pedig. So I would point out and discuss the two most important metrics, the ones that are most impactful to us are our Bridge Efficiency Index and our Pavement Management Index. There's two items that we really take care of in the county, and that's our roads and our bridges. We're not like a lot of other public works departments where we might have trash or parks or gas or electric. We have roads and bridges, and that's it. Well, that's not it. We have noxious weeds, we have planning, we have urban service, all those other ones too, but not trying to sell folks short here. Boy, I dug a hole there. But those are the two most important indexes that we look at. They help guide us as to what projects we should be working on over the next year. They allow us to gauge the effectiveness of our treatments that we do, and they allow us to budget. So those, we really focus on those. Those are very important. The Bridge Efficiency Index we do every 2 years, and the pavement indexes we do at least once a year. We do them typically before winter, and then we'll review our roads after winter. Winters is the big deterioration, create that for our asphalt roads when you get the water that infiltrates cracks and can cause some problems there. The other, and those are both green, and that reflects great funding that we've had over years, and we'll talk about our overlay RAR here in just a minute. And then we look at the other important one is our continued safety improvements, and now our organizational scorecard, Lee will be up here in a minute to talk about the stormwater program. We have meshed into our scorecard some of the stormwater, but the other one that I'll speak to is our engineering group and their safety and structure projects that they do. And you might remember we've talked about 199th recently and some of the safety improvements we're doing there. And we measure crashes with the thought that as we do safety improvements, we hopefully to see the rate of crashes go down. Those are our biggest metrics. Those are the ones we really watch. The other metrics are important, but the ones that we do our day-to-day and year-to-year planning on are really those that I just mentioned. If we go to the next page. So our service challenges, and I've heard other folks say it, inflation, escalation. We have seen an increase in the price of our commodities that we buy to do our work. And that's I think, going to be our biggest obstacle as we go forward in the future, and that's almost becoming a tired theme up here. I do not have it on this. I heard Susan Pekarik say it earlier. Retention, I think, is going to be another issue that we're going to face, and the fuel prices are really showing that. And when I look at our folks in road maintenance, a lot of them do not live in Johnson County. They have to travel a long distance, and this recent spike is very impactful, especially in a tight labor market where there are options, and you might not need to drive 20, 30 miles to come into Public Works, and you can find a job that pays well closer to home. When gas prices are the way they are, then that can create some issues with retention. And then boundary road improvements are I think, something where as the logistics, the geography of annexations development, it's not Overland and Olathe marching south, and the traffic and those issues are staying in their areas. This is Gardner, Edgerton, Spring Hill. I see DeSoto at some point coming online. And that connection between the cities has been creating issues with boundary projects. It all boils down to money and funding and who should pay and how much. So those are our issues that I think we're going to see over the next 10, 20 years, really. Accomplishments, I am so proud of our folks and how they worked through COVID. We've reintegrated our office, and I especially call out our road maintenance folks. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was scary. We didn't know what it was like, and they came into work every day, and whatever measures that we asked them to take, they kept our roads open. They kept our bridges. They plowed our roads, and that was just a great effort by everyone, and they helped out with the health department in helping direct traffic or setting up cones, just whatever they could do. I'm very proud of that. Jeff and his group has completed some great projects, and our dust control program, you can see it grew by over 100%. This is our third year, and it was a pretty significant increase again for this recent year. And we did a survey after the first year. It had an overall 86 approval rating, so that the work that the board did to put that program together, it took some effort. The biggest issue we have with citizens is our gravel roads. And if you live on an asphalt road, you're pretty happy. But if you live on a gravel road, there's a movement to get me out of here, because the gravel roads are difficult to live on. They're dusty in the summer, and then you don't have to worry, because in the winter they'll be snow-packed and icy. Then the spring they'll thaw out and be muddy. So they're really tough. And that dust control program, I think, went a long way to showing that the board heard about some of these issues. Let's see, moving on to our RARs. I mentioned our overlay RAR, $1.75 million. That keeps inching up every year, and that's to be expected as the prices for oil, everything has gone up quite a bit. We track about 5 major commodities, and we're seeing a 30% to 100% increase from just last year. I expect that number to increase through the years. Fleet capital replacement program, we fund that. We have a fleet department now, but that's very important that we have equipment that's working. It really impacts your efforts when your road crews are out there and a piece of equipment doesn't work. It doesn't just mean the cost of that equipment, but then your labor is not as effective. They might have to use a different piece of equipment that's not as effective. So those RARs are really important. And then our CIP projects, we have the Road and Bridge Safety Program at $2.4 million. Again, that's addressing some of the safety improvements that we need to do on our asphalt roads, as well as any bridge replacements or rehabilitation. Our popular CARS program, and then we list out our Lackman to Flum, 159th Street to 175th Street project. That's a cooperative project with the city of Olathe, a very important project next to Heritage Park. So I went through that really quickly. I'll pause there and see what questions or anything we want to go back and revisit.
Going to the Lackman Road improvement, what is the total there? Is it about 10 million?
Okay, I'm going to look at Jeff a little bit. So the total project cost,
For us, yeah. You're showing three different amounts. You got
6.9, is that for just 159 to 167? Yeah. So for the first 1 mile phase was 6.9, and that's the county cost. 4.8 for the second mile.
So it is 10 million, 10, 11 million. Right, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Other questions, Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pedic, I have a number of questions about your scorecard and dashboard, so maybe before next week or sometime in the near future we could discuss. Thank you.
Other questions, Ms. Allenbrand?
I want to thank you for your ongoing work with the public and trying to come to some sort of a agreement on the truck traffic. So I really appreciate all the work that you put into that. I know it's not always easy, but thank you.
Well, thank you.
You know, this is going forward, and I understand concerns, but I think it's important that you continue to work on arterial networks in the unincorporated part of the county. There's current development going on. There will be future development going on. And I look at 175th Street improvements that were made years ago and try to visualize what kind of traffic situation there would be without that thoroughfare from I-35 over to Metcalf. So good luck. And
Mr. Chairman, if he could just.
But it is important.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if he could just pave all the roads out in the unincorporated, I wouldn't have any complaints.
Well, if you don't have the arterial networks, then every road out there will be subject to additional heavy traffic challenges. So anyway, okay, thank you.
Oh, that's what's.
Ms. Fast.
Well, I mean, was that 20, 30 years when the county decided not to do that Century Parkway, you know, the bypass similar to the bypass around Lawrence. So, I mean, these were, you know, decisions, you know, to take off traffic from some of these smaller roads. You know, and so you're now having to, you know, kind of deal with this heavy traffic.
Yeah, no, that's true. Okay, Ms. O'Hara.
Well, I think the whole argument comes down to the semi-truck traffic, and according to our CARNAP, is that we are to aggressively try to keep that truck traffic off of our secondary roads because they have interstate and state highways that they can use. Yeah. And so I think that that's really the crux to the matter. And we have these unimproved asphalt roads, but they have drop-off ditches, and they just absolutely are not, they're not appropriate for semi-traffic. And we're going to have to take aggressive action to stop it, in my opinion.
Yeah, my reading of the CARNAP program speaks to through interstate traffic and not local traffic generated by local businesses. So that's the real issue. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, next up, Mark Dapp will go through stormwater.
The stormwater budget in FY 2023, you'll see this is a bit of an anomaly. Increases roughly $8 million over FY 2022. The local tax support chart that you see in the red is the amount of dedicated sales tax that is budgeted to go to this program. The increase in 2023 is a result of $5 million of reserves being built up in both 21 and 22 as a result of those sales tax exceeding the estimates. So that is being transferred over to capital projects, plus there's an additional increase in the estimated revenue in FY 2023, which accounts for that large increase over 22. So there's been an amount of reserves that has been built up in the stormwater fund in 2023. We're recommending that be transferred over to the capital projects to be available for use. You'll see there's also a 0.25 FTE increase between FY22 and FY23. And as previously stated with Public Works, that's a transfer of 0.25 Public Works employee over to Stormwater. Lee Kallenberger with Stormwater is here for further information.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Lee Kellenberger, Johnson County Stormwater Program Manager. The Stormwater Management Program was created in 1990 to assist the cities within Johnson County with solving their flooding problems. We work together with the Stormwater Management Advisory Council, which is comprised of one voting representative from each of the 19 cities and then one representative for unincorporated Johnson County. Each year we work together. Stormwater and SMAC works together to fund projects and programs in each of our 3 main program areas according to our strategic plan. These include planning and support projects, system management projects, and watershed improvement projects. As Brian mentioned, as an agency within the Public Works Department, we do not have our own organizational scorecard. They are included with the overall Public Works one. But we do have these 3 performance measures shown here and around each main program area, and they are tied to our mission statement of protecting human lives and property, modernizing infrastructure, and improving water quality. These performance measures aren't necessarily designed to make day-to-day decisions about our operations. Rather, they're kind of more programmatic in nature, and they're used on an annual basis to track if we're making progress as the program as a whole in each of our main program areas, and make decisions based on that if we're on track to follow our strategic plan. So on the next slide, you will see a list of challenges and accomplishments. I won't go through them all. I just wanted to highlight a couple. I'll start with challenges first, the first being climate change. We are predicted to get warmer and wetter and see more intense rainfall here in the Midwest, and we are already seeing that. We're piloting some new innovative approaches to try and predict and forecast what future precipitations conditions look like, and then use those to then model different flooding scenarios. And more increased precipitation just doesn't mean more flooding. It also means more stress on our natural infrastructure, our streams, causing more stream bank erosion, more downcutting, lateral migration, which has an impact on our transportation systems, on our water distribution systems, on our sanitary systems. So stormwater doesn't care what's in its path. It's going to take out whatever it needs to. So just not just flooding when we talk about climate change and changes in flows. So that will also kind of tie into item 4 listed there under challenges, which is updating our regional design standards. And that's an attempt to make sure we're building more climate resilient infrastructure in the future that can adapt to and absorb those natural disasters and get our community back to safe operating conditions faster. So on the accomplishment side, I'll just really point out, our system management projects and the watershed improvement projects with our cities. The funding provided by you all through this program makes an immense difference in the ability of the cities to continue to maintain their infrastructure and reduce flood risk and improve water quality throughout the county. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Ms. O'Hara.
With the rapid development of Edgerton with the 1.5 million and 1.5 million square foot buildings, has that been a problematic, and have you been working with Edgerton, and has that been problematic with the Hillsdale drainage area?
Yeah, we have definitely been involved with the entire Meridazine watershed basin that drains to Hillsdale Lake. We completed a watershed master plan in 2020. We're just wrapping it up right now, and it assesses the whole area and the impacts of land use changes and I don't want to get too technical, but changes in stream flow, impacts to stream flow. And then we just most recently met with KDHE here last week, actually, to talk about potential additional regulations or designating the Hillsdale area as a critical watershed management area.
Correct. I mean, that's why we had, in our comprehensive plan, had specified that was a protected area, which seemed like it didn't really.
Yeah, unfortunately, up to this point, Edgerton does not have the regulations that some of the other cities and the more urban cities have. So a lot of that development did not go in with some of the controls that we're proposing through these new regulations.
So KDHE may be stepping into.
Yes.
And when are those regulations going to be
We're just in the infancy of discussing that with,
So that's 2 years away?
most likely. I mean, that would be a guess. I couldn't say.
Can we encourage Edgerton to possibly have more,
Voluntarily?
have more vigorous conversations? Because Hillsdale Lake is a critical water supply.
I think everyone realizes that it's a critical resource and needs protecting. So, and I think that KDHE has had some initial conversations with him, and I think everyone's that I've heard so far is receptive to the direction they're heading.
Okay, thank you.
Lee, there was a meeting, was it last week,
Yes.
with KDHE, Edgerton and Gardner, the county, and Corps of Engineers? I mean, there were a large number of people there, and so I think those conversations have begun, no question.
Yeah.
Other questions, Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kellenberger, thank you for constructing the dashboard. It's definitely a step in the right direction. I appreciate that. I do have some follow-on questions, so when Mr. Pedic comes for a visit, maybe you could be available to talk about that.
Be happy to.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, thank you.
Chair,
Yes,
might I ask if we could take a 5-minute break before our last two?
that's fine, okay.
You can ask, but you're not going to get it.
Yeah, you're not going to get it.
4.5 minutes, okay. Go ahead. We'll take that break.
Recording in progress.
Okay, we'll reconvene from our recess. I think is transportation next.
Josh is up?
Go ahead. This is Leslie Friedel with Budget and Financial Planning, and I will go over the first slide and then turn it over to Josh for the next 2 slides, and then either he or I will wrap it up with the CIP at the end. Their budget in '21 was approximately $18 million, with $6.8 million being provided from the county subsidy. The budget went down slightly in '22 to $17.5 million. This is generally a factor of timing of capital asset purchases of buses. And the subsidy was $7 million. And then in '23, we're proposing a $19.5 million budget and $7 million subsidy, and the increase is due to the pilot program and the additional federal funding. The FTEs will increase to 6 due to recent organizational changes as part of the discussions you've already had earlier this year with the, regarding KCATA. And at that point, I'll turn it over to Josh unless you have any questions for me.
Okay, Josh.
Chairman, Commissioners, Josh Powers, Business Liaison. I'm going to try to move somewhat quickly. Obviously, we'll have questions, but I want to let you determine how our time is spent. When we're looking at our scorecard, our financial standpoint is strong with transit. We have a great relationship and good funding from the Federal Transit Administration through our regular federal formula funding and grant programs, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic relief funding that came to transit. Our federal funding represents 49% of our operating budget. We also have a very positive relationship with the Kansas Department of Transportation. They do a great job in partnering with us to bring innovation and other kinds of advances to transit. That state operating money accounts for about 12% of our operating budget. When we get to service delivery, our fleet is old. We know that. We've recently come before you and received approval to move forward with some purchases that will really help. We just put 5 new 29-foot CNG buses on the road. Obviously, last week we addressed the 15 cutaways that will be coming this year, so that's very much appreciated. Ridership, obviously, is a key metric that we're always going to be looking at. The pandemic, was a problem, but there are other factors as well. Certainly, the new reality, if you will, of where people work, how they work, where they work. So we can get into that. As far as ridership, express route is, our express routes are the ones that have suffered the most with that change in how employees and employers are handling where people work. Fixed route is not doing too badly. It's down over previous years, but up 12% Q1 2022 over Q1 of 2021. So that's a trend that we want to hopefully continue. Microtransit is up big and continues to be big, which can be, a problem of success, right? Because the smaller vehicles carry fewer people, but the cost is still there. So we're going to be doing some things as far as the fare increase and the service area expansion increase to try to mitigate some of that demand. And then expanding the mobility and service options. Obviously, the board authorized the new transit pilots, which we're very thankful for. Over the next 3 to 4 or 5 years, we expect to see returns and a lot of data gathered during that will, support our effort to expand mobility options for folks in the county. As far as operational effectiveness, our cost per mile is approximately $4.65. $4.98. Our average cost per passenger mile is $3.55. When you look at all of our services together, the average cost per ride, that's for everything from paratransit to microtransit and everything in between, is $34.16. 35.72% of that is paid for with local ad valorem dollars. So that cost to the county per ride is on average $12.20. On the organizational development piece of it, we are not going to rush into every partnership that might present itself, but we want to be thoughtful and we want to work with our local stakeholders to advance transit. In the past, obviously, we partnered with the City of Overland Park on microtransit. You heard Julie Brewer from UCS earlier this morning reference our transitional age youth pilot, which is helping kids aging out of, I shouldn't say kids, young adults aging out of foster care with access to microtransit service. So we'll continue to look for those opportunities, whether with local jurisdictions, private entities, or nonprofits to partner where it makes sense. So we can move to the transportation key points. As far as accomplishments, obviously, we consider the ability to bring back transit service to county staff an accomplishment that we're very excited about. We are beginning the setting up interviews for 2 posted positions and getting a 3rd position listed here in the next week or so. As far as those current and future implementations of pilot programs, exactly 1 month ago today, we implemented the changes and adjustments to the express route service. What that really represents is about a 42% reduction in overall service, but some other adjustments as far as streamlining and really prioritizing people's use of park and rides to make that a more attractive service for folks. That was a month ago on May 9th. Coming up in July, we'll see the microtransit expansion as well as increased frequency on local fixed routes. That will continue throughout the year as we have a phased implementation. And then currently, this relates to one of our challenges. Currently, we're putting that Saturday service for fixed route off until 2023 because of staffing difficulties, which you've heard today from lots of different folks, and I'll touch on. But moving to those service challenges, obviously the uncertainty of what comes after quote-unquote COVID and what our new normal is, trying to mitigate the demand and ability to offer quality service on microtransit and paratransit. And as I said, staffing of drivers is becoming a challenge. We are adequately staffed for the service that we run today, but looking into the future and expanding service, we're working very hard to try to staff up to get to that level, but it is a challenge. And then the last thing on this slide, and I'll pause there for questions, is the question of fare. Obviously, the Ride KC system in Kansas City, Missouri, as the captain of their own ship, if you will, determined to go to 0 fare. The other jurisdictions have not made a commitment one way or another. We are currently not charging fares on anything other than on-demand service. We have federal funding that covers that piece of revenue for us through the end of this year. But that is a policy question for the board to engage with, and we understand as staff brings forward what we view as the pros and cons of either returning to a fare or remaining 0 fare. But obviously, that's the purview of the board. So I'll pause there and stand for questions.
Questions? Ms. O'Hara?
0 fare in Kansas City, Missouri. Has ridership gone up?
So, Commissioner O'Hara, I appreciate the question. I wish I had better information for you. I think that I hate repeating myself when I'm answering or discussing that question, but that was rolled out in the middle of a pandemic, and I don't think they even expected to see huge increases immediately. I know that ridership in Kansas City, Missouri is up nominally, but I would have to go back and get that data for you.
It seems like that people are rather reluctant to go back to the fixed routes, and in the big buses, it seems like the on-demand has been what really has been popular with the people. And I'm assuming does Kansas City, Missouri have those on-demand types of services?
So they're moving in that direction, but we really were the leader on that. So they're kind of taking lessons learned from us and moving forward.
Of course, that's extremely expensive, and we're going to have to balance that out as far as what we can afford. And
I would agree.
It's really not mass transit. It's a different concept. So, all right, thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Powers, I have many questions about the scorecard and dashboard, but to expedite this afternoon's meeting, maybe we could visit on that at a later date.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Myers?
Not a question, but a statement, and I don't have any numbers to back all up, but I can report that I do think ridership is up, especially weekend ridership is definitely up in Kansas City, Missouri.
Thank you.
It's fast.
So when you said $12, was that for micro or fixed route?
That's everything rolled up into one aggregate number.
So that includes the Because, I mean, the feds pay less on micro than they do on fixed.
That's absolutely correct,
So
Commissioner.
you're saying para, micro, fixed, you average it together, the county taxpayers pay $12.
Correct, per ride, yes, ma'am.
Just one, yeah, and what was the actual cost? It was like $34 and something.
16 cents.
34.16, because people need to realize that federal dollars, local dollars, it all comes out of our pockets. I mean, it sounds great, $12, but it's really $34.16 is the cost.
That's the overall cost.
Okay, thank you.
I think that was impacted also by the pandemic, and but if transit dollars are available at the federal level and we do not use them, then they go somewhere else. So there's no reason not to, use those kind of dollars to support our local service. Any other questions, Ms. Allenbrand?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are a lot of people using this service that could not have the transportation to go to work. We even have people in our own building here using that transportation, so it is giving them a way to go to work. It's also helping people that have disabilities getting to and from, so thank you.
That's a good question. Josh, are those special transportation services included in those numbers?
Yes, sir.
Pardon?
Yes, sir, they are.
Yeah, so we have a large number of those with disabilities who go to work at the Elmore Workshop who also use that transportation, and so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, thank you, Josh.
Okay, our final department for today, we're going to go back to Public Safety and hear from Department of Emergency Services. Ted Clemens will start us off.
Ted Clemens with Budget. The Department of Emergency Services tax support and expenses increase primarily for the budget parameters in salary and benefits, and then the request for additional resources that Paul will discuss. One note is that these numbers will change with the action earlier this morning based on moving money around for ambulances, essentially. And the FTEs increased by around 2.0, and that is for the RAR that we are proposing for 2.0 emergency communication specialists. And we can go to 911 now. So on the 911 fund, just a couple points of note. The increase is due to 2 years of the capital lease to end that with Motorola. So that's why you see the expenses increasing. And then there's some notes below, but the primary important one is just the limitation statutorily on what we can spend that on. So I'll turn it over to Paul now.
Good afternoon. Thanks for letting us be with you today. Wanted to let you know that this is a little bit different than the last time we were here, because the last time we made a budget presentation, I was representing the Department of MedAct. And so bringing this all together has been a little bit exciting and a little bit challenging. And I want to acknowledge the help of Debbie Addig, Ted Clemens, and our other staff as well. So with respect to the scorecard, we see some green and some blue, and the blue is indicating some new opportunities for us. And talk about the red, but just looking at our key performance indicators, we're pleased that on the EMS side, as a percentage of our budget revenue, in last year, we exceeded our revenue expectations by 9%. So we hit the 109% mark. And it's good for business, but it's a result of people needing our services. Our goal is typically 90%, and we've done pretty well by the last couple years. As far as the average collection rate for EMS, our goal is 64%. In 2021, it was 68%. In 2020, the year before, it was 70%. What that means is we're collecting on 68% of those accounts that are billed for ambulance service. Now, I won't go into the breakdown here, but we'll entertain questions later on if you like. With respect to our customer satisfaction surveys is really just a simple card that we send out to our clients and our patients. And we have consistently seen a 96 to 97% patient satisfaction rate, either satisfied or very satisfied with our service. In discussing our community education courses, we've seen a significant drop in those because of the pandemic. They are coming back. Some of those public education courses include distracted driving, stop the bleed, hands-only CPR, and those things that are important for public safety and that improves our community living. The number of opportunities provided to enhance a prepared community, that's new for us. And part of that new prospect is we took our community education specialist and public information officer that was at MedAct and converted that to a public affairs officer that serves now the entire Department of Emergency Services. So she'll support MedAct emergency communications and emergency management in terms of community engagement and helping with those educational programs. Striving to optimize a continuum of out-of-hospital medical care. Our response time performance goal is 90%, meaning that we're arriving on scene within 10 minutes or less 90% of the time. Now, we're on target for that, and we're about 92%, I believe, at the moment, but there are some pockets of the county that are well below that 90% into the mid to upper 80s. With respect to the dispatch side, call receipt to recognition for dispatcher-assisted CPR, our goal is 60 seconds or less. Currently, we're performing that in 22 seconds. So that means someone who is calling with a cardiac arrest emergency is getting help over the phone and instruction on how to do CPR, and that information is being relayed to the responders very quickly. Now, about 99.5% of our calls in the ECC are answered within 15 seconds, and our goal is 90% or greater. So we're still good there, despite some of the staffing challenges. And then we are having a little bit of a dip in meeting our International Academy of Emergency Dispatch compliance standards, and that takes into account quite a bit of metrics, and I can provide additional detail on that. So right now we're about 87.4%, and our goal is 90%. Some good news on the exterior side is that about 45.9% of our patients suffering cardiac arrest in Johnson County are surviving, and that's not just surviving the hospital, but surviving to out of hospital to continue to be productive citizens. The national average is about 32.5%. Now, something else that is really impressive in Johnson County, and this is because of our Heart Safe group and our community education prior to, but bystanders in Johnson County perform CPR in these cases 69.9% of the time, compared to the national average of 42.2%. With respect to employee engagement, we have maximizing engagement, safety, and wellness of all DES employees in blue. There are some new initiatives that we're implementing, some old, some peer support. We're also looking at how do we bring our department employees together in a cross-cultural environment instead of just EMS only or ECC, bringing them all together. So hope to be able to report something exciting and new on that next time. Well, and our overtime is just very high. We're strapped, just like you've heard throughout the budget presentations. On the MedAct side, we're down about 22 or 23 positions. I think on the dispatch side, they're down about 6 positions. But there is some light at the end of the tunnel, and I think that through the next several months, if our recruitment efforts continue to pay off, we might be able to find some way to get at least to some near normal staffing, at least within 95%. Our key points, I talked about our cardiac arrest survival rate, so I won't touch on that again during here. But I do want to go to the third bullet and talk about the integration of EMTs into the MedAct and the service model. You recall, maybe it was about a year or so ago, or a little bit before that, I brought to your attention that we were having some trouble recruiting paramedics, and we continue to. But we've been bringing EMTs in, and for instance, this last go-round of applications, which, by the way, we have an open application process now, we don't shut it down. We saw about 73 applicants for the position of EMT, compared to just last year when we were seeing 5 or 6 applicants for the position of paramedic. So what this is allowing us to continue to provide the advanced life support service in Johnson County, but pair an EMT up with a paramedic so we can continue to fulfill that mission. The Emergency Management Division coordinated the fulfillment of over 40 emergency requests to the state of Kansas for assistance. In January through May, Emergency Management also facilitated the distribution of 9.5 million PPE items and fulfilling the request from over 350 local organizations. Now, as akin to that, we were working with facilities and emergency management to right-size our PPE cache and to ensure that we had an adequate 90-day supply. So Dan Robinson and his staff and the facilities ops warehouse staff have done a great job, and we were able to issue about another 4 million items to the public and businesses and clinics who needed those things. On the emergency communication side, we've won a couple of awards, one for MARC Regional Training Performance Award and another international award for International Dispatcher of the Year. That dispatcher was selected from 40 finalists in 8 countries. With respect to our accomplishments, we believe that we're undergoing a successful integration of our departments into a combined department, causing some improved communications between emergency management, the communications division, and emergency services, emergency medical services. We also, as I mentioned, have established a single source for providing public information and community relations. We're engaged in opportunities to explore creative solutions to maintain our minimum staffing, increase recruiting efforts, working with HR and others to help us increase our recruiting efforts, but also on the EMS side, we've implemented an all-hazard staffing plan, which typically would be used for disaster. We implemented it during the pandemic, but now we're also using it because of our staffing crisis. And we're also looking for creative solutions to supply chain challenges, including making sure all our divisions have essential PPE supplies, equipment, and ambulances. Our service challenges, staffing is it. That's the nutshell. Staffing and getting our necessary equipment are our challenges. But I've talked on that over the last couple meetings and even throughout this discussion that we don't take this lightly. We're working with our staff, we're working with others throughout the county to make sure that we're not leaving any stones unturned and working diligently to make sure all our services are provided. And let me move on to the RARs. So we're grateful to be considered for RARs. We've always got something, it seems, and we're glad that we're able to get some positions funded for emergency communications. We requested 4, and 2 of those are being recommended for being funded. Now, I spoke with our operations manager, and she indicated that these 2 would be would be an appropriate number, considering the fact that we're not fully staffed right now at the moment. But if we were fully staffed plus these two, she stopped short of saying we would be golden. So I think this will help fill our needs for the near term. We were fortunate to be able to have the increased vehicle transfer occur or recommended, and a one-time equipment transfer to replace bunker gear. Our turnout gear for EMS is considerably old, is tattered, in itself is becoming a hazard, so we're needing to protect our employees, and this will help us do that. And then also, we have radios. A couple years ago, we bought new radios, but we also want to make sure we can maintain those over their life so we can maximize their longevity. And so we appreciate this being recommended as well as our cardiac monitors. Everything is getting expensive, and we asked, and we appreciate this $131,870 being recommended for funding. With the unfunded RARs, we have some outstanding needs, but these aren't so significant that we need to focus on them. Quite frankly, with respect to our staffing, we need to focus on getting our seats filled first. So I really don't have any comments on these other than that they're here. We appreciate the county manager allowing us to include these as an ask, but we really need to focus on where we are first and making sure our seats are filled before we can ask for anything else. And then the countywide radio system infrastructure that's being funded as a CIP, that was reflective in the budget, and that will be helpful as we serve over 40 agencies in Johnson County. And I think I kept that under 2 minutes, Robin, is that right? Okay.
Does that complete your presentation?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Davis, you said there's some possible light at the end of the tunnel on staffing. Is there anything that can be attributed to the possible successes of recruitment?
Well, I think it's our staff, it's our collective diligence, making sure that we're getting the word out, making sure that that we're recruiting in the right places. And so HR has been part of that. Our community education specialist has been part of that. And then also our own staff that does the word of mouth, and also our interview processes. The other thing is that EMTs have contributed to that as well.
That's very good.
Ms. Hansley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to commend you, Mr. Davis, on the efficiencies that you are seeking and have implemented. I remember when you came and talked about putting the EMTs in place to work with the paramedics, and obviously that's been a big move in the right direction in terms of helping with the staffing. So thank you for being willing to be innovative and try some new things to bring about efficiencies. I had a question in terms of the KPI in regarding the revenue as percent of budget. You said revenue was up a bit, and if I'm recalling, didn't you come before us some point in the past couple of years, and we increased the fees for the ambulance services? Has that made a difference in the revenue also?
Well, it has. So with commercial payers. So there were a couple things that happened. This board voted to increase our fees, which puts us right in the mid-range of the metro. So we're not high, we're not low, but also there was a contract that we engaged with Blue KC, and that was necessary that we increased our rates so we could maximize the return on that contract. Now, with our Medicare patients, we didn't see any increased revenue there, and certainly not Medicaid or the private pay.
Thank you.
Ms. O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Davis, Are you having the issues with pay compression that the sheriff and the DA has been discussing with us over the past few weeks?
We have had, but we took some steps. We had some funds within our budget. We worked with budget and HR to resolve some of those issues. And so we're not in the same place as we were before. And we have had some good luck with that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ashcraft.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple things, Chief. Did you calculate an ROI for the 2 new FTEs? Because there seems like there would be a potentially significant offset in the reduction of overtime cost, because that's time and a half, I'm assuming. So how did those figures work out? You've got 184,000, but there's got to be an overtime savings, so there's some kind of offset there, is there not?
There would be an offset, but when we sat and racked our brains on this ROI question, we're still paying overtime through the nose, and it is, I don't know what that's going to look like at this point. Once we get everybody
Overtime for the
staffed.
what?
To the nose.
I'm sorry, we're paying a lot of overtime. I don't know how to offset that for the ROI on those 2 positions when we've got so many vacant positions.
Okay. And that leads to my second question. As I understand it, there's something like, Mr. Thompson, 5 or 6 or 7 PSAPs.
7.
7 PSAPs in the county. We have 2 in county government. So I'm just wondering, from a taxpayer point of view, does it make sense to add 2 FTEs when the full and fair utilization of that resource is still somewhat in a fluid state? I just wondered, was that part of the conversation? Because I recall with COVID, I guess it was 4 years ago, Overland Park ended up adding something like, was it 7 or 12 to their PSAP to bolster their operations. And I'm just wondering if these other agencies are adding staff, if there's not some cost savings for not just us, but these other communities that we were able to explore.
So, response, I said there are 7 PSAPs, and as you stated correctly, 2 of those are in Johnson County government.
Right.
And as I recall, during the public safety presentation last week before last now, that was a subject of question. So we still have some ongoing internal conversations on that topic. When you turn to those 5 outside municipally operated PSAPs, those, as we know, are decisions that those respective governing bodies would need to make. I will share that we have had some conversations, and there may be some willingness to explore some consolidation efforts there, but those are slow-moving at best.
Okay. And Chief, to expedite conversations, I have some questions about the dashboard and scorecards, so maybe we could visit offline.
Yes, sir.
Paul, the new station that opened on 151st Street next to the logistics center, there are units there. There's a unit there, right? Medac unit.
The new station where, sir?
Pardon?
The new station where?
It would be 191st, next to the logistics center. Fire District number 1.
Oh, yes. We have a squad there. It's not an ambulance, but we do have a squad there with that fire station.
All right, now there is a Fire District number 1 station in downtown Edgerton. Is there a Medac unit there or not? I don't remember.
No, we only have 1 location with Fire District 1, and that's at that new station.
Thank you. Ms. Hanslick?
Thank you. I just had another follow-up question about in relation to revenue. And you may not have this right in front of you, but I'm just curious, what percentage of calls are for helping people who have fallen, and those calls that we don't get reimbursement for? Do you know about what percentage that might be?
I don't know. I can run that for you and have that for you early next week.
I'm just curious, because I'm assuming we're not the only department in the country that's dealing with that, and I've just wondered if there's any innovative solutions that anybody is seeking to help, not necessarily get reimbursement, but somehow to address those kinds of situations without having to send out a full squad of folks to respond to those situations.
I'll get those stats to you very soon.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right, Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And if you could leave your revisit list, next Thursday and Friday is our budget review, where we'll finalize decisions for for us to come back the following week with a maximum expenditure budget. And so we will come forward with visit list and just to finalize any decisions that the board would like to make for that next week.
Thank you for that reminder. Next Thursday, we will begin the final deliberations.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And Maury, I think, is going to have some framework on the ARPA funds to bring to you.
Right.
So we'll do that first, I believe. Or did you want to go last, Maury? I think we'll do Maury first.
Thank you very much. We are adjourned. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.